Those of you who've been on the Inspiring Change Conference journey will know that a couple of years ago, we featured a case study from BAE Systems, where the then head of employee relations spoke about how he had introduced flexible working into the shipyards on the Clyde. The workers, who are not dissimilar to those working in construction, were initially sceptical and concerned that they would face a reduction in take-home pay, but they soon realised the benefits and the grandfathers were the ones who most relished their new working patterns, finding that they had time to enjoy their grandchildren and take an active role in their care. But like all good businesses, BAE measured the results, which were increased productivity, up by 17%, reduction in sickness and absence, down from 4.3% to 1.8%. Their business processes fundamentally improved. They had an excellent safety performance, and the list goes on. I'd encourage you all to catch up with that case study on the CECA website. It really is fascinating. Additionally, I know that many of my colleagues at Build UK are supporting a pilot with TimeWise to help those businesses involved identify the benefits and practical solutions of flexible working in construction. And I look forward to hearing about their outcomes. So that's enough of my soapbox. Let's get on with today. And I'm now going to hand over to my friend and colleague, Manon Bradley, who will be chairing the first panel session.
Good morning. Thank you, Bryony. I know for a fact that you are extremely passionate about flexible working, and indeed, the very first time we met, you mentioned it and have been mentioning it ever since. So let me just share my screen. Right, so that I can drive the slides going forward. Here we go. Hopefully, there we go. Hopefully you can all see that. So I'm chairing this session, this first session, where we've got Amna Khan, Dawn Moore and Ricky Pratt, all who are talking about their experience of delivering flexible and agile working on site. Now, much of this experience is pre-COVID, but no doubt there'll have been some changes since then. So perhaps we can explore that in the questions and answers afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Amna Khan, Head of HR at Taylor Wimpey, to talk about her experiences in agile and flexible working for their team. Amna, we haven't rehearsed this, but do you want me to leave this slide on whilst you switch your video on, or shall I pause the screen sharing whilst you're presenting?
You can do whatever you like, actually. I don't have any slides, so if you want a different slide on, then that's absolutely fine with me. I'm just trying to figure out how I share my video.
Well, I'll leave that on whilst you get that. All
right, okay, there it is. Okay, start my video. Okay, good morning, everybody. Firstly, thank you for having me. And Bryony, really concur with, I guess, your opening comments around agile and flexible working. I work for Taylor Wimpey, and I'm, really proud, I think. And this isn't an advertisement, I promise you, for people that want to come and work for Taylor Wimpey. But I'm really proud of working for a progressive organisation where agile and flexible working has been endorsed and really supported from the very top. So our CEO, our group PLC absolutely have driven this for a number of years now. So it wasn't anything new to us, but of course, what you normally need is not just the CEO, but our different various business units and our senior leaders that are operational to really grasp that. And if I'm honest, it was hit and miss. So we embarked on a journey about 18 months ago to say, right, how can we be much more intentional on flexible and agile working? How can we really encourage our business units, our site-based leadership teams, our office teams to break free of that that kind of 9 to 5 going into the office mold. So we'd embarked on this journey where we invested invested in technology. So we it was actually probably one of the better timed projects that we managed to roll out just before the pandemic hit, where we had a digital workplace rollout. So ensuring that people have the tools, first of all, is really important. So ensuring that we had laptops for individuals, phones were appropriate. We also provided training on Microsoft Teams. And we built actually a playbook on agile working. And my HR business partners were starting to have some really good conversations with the leadership teams, with our managing directors and their direct reports, to talk about, you know, truly how we could become an agile business. Now, don't get me wrong, we had lots of examples of agile working. But if I now go back to where we were this time last year, or even you know, the latter part of last year versus now, it is almost like night and day. So we had, you know, some core hour examples. We had individuals who might have worked remotely from a site, for instance, or remotely from home. But it wasn't really progressing in the way that we wanted to. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. Now, thankfully for us as a business, we were able to continue working from an office perspective, because we had the tools, we had the training, but we just hadn't practiced it enough. So when lockdown hit, we knew that we could do it. And there were a few kind of hairy moments around, you know, are our IT systems going to cope with having, you know, 3,000 people potentially logged on working remotely at the same time? How are we going to collaborate? How are we going to actually move forward, for instance, on project? How are we going to monitor performance? All of those kind of closed mind questions, I think, were appearing. And I have to say, so, you know, they often say it takes a crisis to then have transformation. And as a business, whilst we were already demonstrating, particularly in the house building sector, I know that we were leading the way on agile and flexible working. Where we are now is in a completely different place. So what we've now, so I guess what I wanted to do was talk to you more about what we've done since this pandemic, or during this pandemic, and how positively that's transformed our business. So look, you know, our business already knew, and our leaders already knew things like, you know, the increase in productivity, the gender diversity, the ability to attract people from different areas that are more willing to come and work in a business that might not necessarily be on their doorstep because there's agile working, the reduction in commuting, for instance, the well-being. So, you know, the kind of, I guess, business imperative was there. But what we often had was some of our leaders saying, oh, but we can't do it. And the reason we can't do it is because we need to treat everyone equally. You know, we can't do it on site, and therefore you can't do it in the office, because, you know, it's really important that we have some equity and parity. And actually, as you will know, that is actually a bit of a nonsense. In order to have true inclusion, you have to treat people differently, and you have to acknowledge and adjust what you do. So we were really open and said, do you know what, if you are a bricklayer, frankly, you cannot work remotely, you cannot work in an agile way, but we can think about how we can be much more flexible with you in terms of your shifts, your working hours. And I think just doing that and catering some of our working ways to those various different roles has been really positive. So we got to a point of, you know, pandemic, a significant number of people now working remotely. We've got now, and now even though offices are opening, people continue to work remotely, and we're actually now struggling to get people back into the office, if I'm honest. And some of those pitfalls that we're starting to see are things like, you know, whilst collaboration has absolutely gone up, productivity massively increased, focus around well-being increased, There are certain things just around development, around conversations, around connection that we do want people to come back into the office on. But just to, I guess, take you through how we supported individuals with agile working. So as I said, we had a playbook. And in that playbook, a lot of the stuff that we did was we pushed it towards our intranet, really getting individuals to look at the information that's available online on our intranet around how we work, when we work, what we do when we work, and we put some principles together. So for instance, you know, safety, health and safety must not be compromised when you're working remotely. So things like, for instance, you know, another bit of a barrier for us was, oh, but you've got to do a DSE assessment, and then what if people have to go and buy lots of equipment? What's the impact of that? And of course, the reality is, when you look at the detail of that, is you don't need to do a DSE assessment if it's not your main base location. Just bear with me a minute, right? These are the perils of working from home, actually. You know, when people just come into the room and think, oh, it's fine. And actually, they're the perils, but they're actually also quite positive things. Because I think now people are far more relaxed, and they don't mind if you get things wrong, or if somebody walks in, or you can see someone's background. Whereas I think previously, as a business, we would have been a little bit more corporate, and I think it's much nicer now to see that authenticity and people's I guess authentic selves when they're not in the work environment, actually. But going back to I guess the framework we put together, which was, you know, so performance levels must be met if you're going to work in an agile way. It's got to be cost neutral. We've got to think about staffing levels, for instance. Others shouldn't be adversely impacted. We also did things, you know, just some basic stuff around meeting protocols. So for instance, you know, looking at thinking about making sure that you have your meetings at the right time, maybe during some core hours, versus, you know, a typical example is, I'm a morning person, so I will get up fairly early and I'll be working, and you know, just because I'm green, it's like 7 o'clock in the morning, I don't particularly want to be talking to anybody because I'm trying to get things done, and you get somebody calling you. So we're learning lots of things as we're going. But interestingly, what we did do before we put together our principles was we decided to do a number of pulse checks, and that was for us, you know, the world has changed. Our organisation and the way that we communicate has changed, and we wanted to understand from our people what they wanted, and do they actually, you know, are they really enjoying that kind of remote working, or do they want to come back to the office? And I wanted to share some statistics with you. So we've got about just under 6,000 people in our employ at Taylor Wimpey. And this was a survey that we did over about a couple of days, and we did weekly ones on different topics. So this one was around well-being and remote working. And we had about, I think it was 1,200 respondents, might have been slightly under that actually. But what they said was, so 91% of those people that responded said that they would welcome the chance to continue to work remotely for 2 days or more a week. 97% of those individuals said that their well-being was positively impacted, and actually we have really progressed our well-being agenda much more since we've been comfortable and confident that we've got a lot more people working remotely. 87% of people felt that collaboration was unaffected by remote working, because that was one of the kind of barriers sometimes from our leaders. And actually, I think you see more people. Personally, for me, I see my, you know, I've got a team that work nationally across the country, and I see my team pretty much every day now, because we'll just drop in, have a conversation. And I think those connections are a little bit more stronger. They do anyway become stronger when you go through change. So our teams and our people wanted that remote working. So, you know, it is a real positive success story. And actually, I know that Bryony wanted me to talk about the D&I conference that that I led a couple of months ago, which was done remotely. And actually, I think if we remember 2020 for anything, it will be this pandemic and of course the A-levels shambles that we've had recently, but also Black Lives Matter. And we have it was only our second year running, so of our D&I conference, and it was going to be that traditional conference, you know, you get everyone together, you do a bit of sharing, you get speakers. And I was really torn personally around, do we continue with our D&I conference, or do we do it virtually? And we'd never done anything like that ever before, virtually. And I felt for you, Bryony, this morning, just the nerves, because I remember those nerves vividly, opening up a session. And I've got, you know, some very, you know, all of our managing directors, our CEO, lots of very senior people, as well as our champions, and thinking, goodness, is this going to work? And I think it was a very, very successful event. We had feedback from our divisional chairman, who said it was the best conference they'd ever been to in their career, which I think, you know, when you get that type of a comment, and the reason for it is individuals were able to use the comments box, for instance, you know, the chat box, and communicate and be part of the discussion a lot more than you would be, for instance, if you're sat in a conference. We used Slido, for instance, which was a confidential kind of surveys and polls. We had various videos and speakers. It was really interactive. And actually, looking back on it now, we were able to invite a lot more people than we traditionally would have invited, if I'm honest, because you just can, because of the virtual element. I mean, there were a few hiccups, but I just, you know, I think you've got to have that open mind. And I think, you know, the open mind, trialing, not being afraid to make mistakes, and just going for it is really important. So I think I feel like someone's paid me to talk about agile working, but you know, it's been really positive for us as a business. It continues to be. As we start to go back to some sort of a new normal, we will ensure that this becomes a much more frequent part of our business. We've learned loads, so we've had to think about, for instance, we've done some specific training with our line managers around remote working. And managing people's well-being and performance. So there's lots of stuff we're learning, but on the whole, you know, it is, you know, the whole piece around back-to-back meetings, time management. So we're learning loads, but really, really positive experience at Taylor Wimpey. And of course, I do think it's because we had that openness and want to, and desire to progress that within our business. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour. I could go on about it for a while, but I'm going to hand back over now. Is that okay, Manon?
Thank you, Anna. That's great. That's really good. And those of you who've been paying attention to the slides will realise that you're looking at something different to what I'm looking at. So apologies for that. I can see a fully screen shared slide, but apparently others can't. I've been getting text messages from Bryony, from Sarah. So apologies for that. We're just going to try and sort that out. Whilst we're doing that, I just wanted to reflect that I absolutely agree with you, Amna, about the perils of remote working and sitting in your living room or your dining room. But actually, that's a joy. It brings people together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, actually seeing people's homes and their kids and their dogs and cats is bringing people together whilst we're apart. And there were a couple of things that you said about it takes a crisis to bring about transformation. I think that's very true.
Yeah. And
I think this crisis has revolutionised all of our companies in terms of enabling remote working. And the one that will stick with me, I think, is bricklayers can't work flexibly. They can't work remotely. Very true indeed. Very true. So, and also a word about, Bryony tells me it's okay now. So hopefully you can see, I'm just going to move on to Dawn's first slide. Can everybody see that okay? Can you see that, Anna? Dawn, can you see that?
yes.
Yes, thank you.
That's good. So just a word about questions, because Bryony, in her passion to talk about the importance of flexible and agile working, forgot to mention what we're doing about the questions is there is a session at the end where we'll take questions. So I know some people have started to write questions in the chat. Hi, Steve Box. But we'll reserve them to the end if that's okay. And what we'll do is I'll keep an eye on those those questions. And when we come to that, I'll call upon you to switch your camera on and to ask the question. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Dawn. Dawn, if you let me know when you want me to move on the slides, hopefully I can make them work properly. All right.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, if you can move on to the first slide, please, Malin. Good morning, everybody. Really delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you about my experience in our sector on flexible and agile working. I think one thing I would say is I want to start with a message that I'll also end with, which is that in my experience, agile working in particular is all about culture and quality conversations. I think always has been. That's become even more true throughout the pandemic, and I think remains true going forward. One of the challenges about it being about culture and quality and conversations rather than process and procedures, though, is culture and conversations are often two of the hardest things to address where there are barriers. But what I hope to offer you in the next sort of 10 to 15 minutes are really four things. One, how to put agile working in context against flexible working, because often the two get confused, and I think helping to simplify the confusion that exists around those will help embed it much better going forward. I'm going to share with you on three levels just a few tips how I've sort of seen it work in action. That's both from a business case perspective, a practical perspective, and more importantly behavioural, and a few tips particularly related to changing the culture and thinking around some of the barriers. I will talk about a couple of the myths that still exist in my experience. They've existed for a long time and still do, and one or two ways that sort of I've used to try and help dispel them, and then give you a few case studies of where it's really worked on sites and on projects in our sector, and that is really where the bit around quality conversations comes in. And as Malin said, happy to take any questions when we have the panel session at the end. So if you could move on to the next slide, please, Malin. Very quickly, I wanted to cover, for the benefit of everybody really, the slight differences between agile and flexible working. And I've found particularly when you talk to projects about this to try and embed understanding of how it might work for them, I think that the slight differences are very important. So just starting on the right, I think as everybody's aware, flexible working is something that is more formal and is more about a process for getting a permanent change to somebody's T's and C's. There's been a process in existence for a long time, and most people tend to be familiar with it. Agile working, on the other hand, is something that's a lot more informal, and I think people have talked about work-life balance for a long time, but it's something that can be short, medium, or even long-term, but it isn't the same as flexible working. And the real challenge about agile working and really embedding it is people need to feel, whether that's the manager, whether it's an employee, that they can have a conversation with their line manager about it, and also have a conversation even if the initial answer about what they want might be no. And investing time and effort in creating that culture where people feel like they can have those conversations isn't easy, but has to be done if really as a sector we're ever to get over this. So again, as I go through this, I'll share with you some examples of how you might go about doing that. So sometimes, as I've mentioned, there's work to be done to make it clear in an organisation that agile working is something that actually can work for everyone. That's both the organisation and employees. And in my experience, it's worth looking at that on three levels. So certainly the business case level, which has been touched upon by Aman already, at a practical level in terms of setting some parameters around how it may or may not work, and also at the behavioural level, which is about that conversation. So I'll take each of those three in turn and just share a few tips based on experience really. So if we could move on to the next slide, Manon, which is really talking about how to make it work and the benefits and the business case. Look, I'm not going to run through all of the theory, all the stuff that's well known about the benefits for better work-life balance, etc. And we've already heard it touched on already around increased productivity. What I would encourage those of you, though, based on my experience, to think about is the type of sector that we are, and the way that sector thinks in terms of how making something like agile working, which particularly to the skeptics can be a little bit intangible in some cases, how to make it tangible. Our sector does like numbers, and it does like to be able to translate things that are very transparent. So, for example, in my current organisation, you know, we've looked constantly, both before, during, and as we come out of the pandemic, how some of the changes to our ways of working through more agility has saved us on things like travel and technology and all of those good things. But we've also continued to relate it over a number of years to some of the more generic challenges that the sector has. You know, all of us will be familiar with things like the skills shortage and the fact that, you know, we see there has been a small skills pool out there to get what we actually need. If you translate the benefits of agile working that are well known, and for example, only 2 weeks ago, a national newspaper, which many of you may have seen, published the subject of a study which said how employees' wants and wishes in the workplace have actually changed over the last 10 years. And by far and away, the number one thing that 70% of job seekers in that study said that they looked for in an organisation, and the first question they would ask is, how flexible or agile are you? And that may mean different things to different people, but what they really meant is there flexibility in the culture of your organisation for me to have a conversation with you if I join you about how you get the best out of me and how I can give the best out of you? If those things don't start to create a very tangible and very sector, in some cases, very organisational specific business case for you, I don't know what will. So I think take the theory, take the practice, but if you can make it quite specific to your organisational challenges in those sorts of ways, it tends to be a good starting point for even making the biggest skeptics around agile working sit up and take notice, I guess. If you could move on, Bannon. Secondly, there is about how you translate this practically within the organisation. So if we could move on to the next slide. And that is about, first of all, having clear principles of operation. So as I mentioned, while this is slightly different to flexible working than it is about a process and procedure, there clearly has to be some parameters around it. So every job is different. And, you know, we've certainly encouraged our people to say, look, while this is informal, we need to make it work. So let's agree in advance what we're going to do. Let's have regular review periods because jobs change, working arrangements change. And let's agree how we monitor performance and outputs. That might be simply through conversations, it may be through something more formal, but these arrangements have to continue to work for the team. I think, you know, if you can make that happen, then that will work. And thirdly, looking at the current slide, I think we've jumped on one, but also at a cultural level, I think, so if you can go back, Manon, I think we've jumped from one to the other. Okay, thank you. The third point on how to make this work is really supporting people to take the business case, put some practical things in place, but then more importantly, translate that into a quality conversation. I want to share with you, you know, one thing we've done at Murphy that we've seen work, which is really to focus for probably the last 8 months now on what a quality conversation around agile working might look like. And it takes the 3 things I've just mentioned and really put it into practice. You know, we've given people some quite specific tips without being prescriptive on how to set expectations around agile working, how you focus on outputs, the best way of managing remotely, and how to generally just make this a good part of a team working arrangement. And I'll give some examples of how that's worked in a minute, how to have a conversation about it, and more importantly, to create that culture where, as I mentioned at the beginning, people feel like they can have a conversation at any point about a working arrangement that not only suits their team, but also their own circumstances. And I think I can't probably emphasize enough the importance of investing in helping your people to have those quality conversations, how to do it, how to support them. Some people will be better at this than others, but this is really the key to successful agile working and embedding it in your culture, in my view. And like I say, I'll give a couple of case studies in a minute. If you wouldn't mind moving on, Manon. So just before I show those case studies, I think Bryony alluded to it at the beginning. Changing culture and thinking around this isn't easy. It's much easier to change a process and a procedure. And there are, in my experience, still a couple of major myths we have in our sector about agile working. And I'd just like to kind of get us thinking about what those still are and the reality of how you can work around those, really. The big one I've come across now, probably for the last 7 years of talking about agile working in construction, and particularly when you talk to people on sites, it's sort of say, well, you know, if I have a conversation about this, people will feel that they'll request all sorts of stuff, won't they, and want to work however they like. And, you know, this isn't necessarily, we've spent a lot of time talking to people in my organisation about the fact that ways of working have to work not only culturally but practically. Every single job's different, and there are some arrangements that simply won't work for some jobs. So, for example, perhaps a really obvious one, but it's to put it into context. You know, most of our roles won't work for 100% home working, and actually, when we talk to our people, that's not actually what they want. But other jobs lend themselves to a better balance, and we've invested quite a lot in helping our line managers understand that if somebody asks for an arrangement that isn't practical, they can say no to this. But actually what they should be talking about on the back of that is what may work, and educating them in options that could work regardless of what the jobs they're talking about actually are. And a big thing about our sector, and we try to embed this in all of our people, and I think it's important for everyone, you know, we also have clients. You know, our work is about meeting not only employees' needs but also clients' needs. So getting that balance right is absolutely critical. If we could move on to the next slide, Manon. I think the other common myth, and you know, I think Ricky is really going to bring this to life in his session, I'm sure. But there is still a big myth that agile working is an office thing, and actually doesn't really work on site. This is where I would come back to that real education and the power of the conversation, and helping people to understand that there are options for every job. Some things may work for one job but not in others, but you've kind of got to get that understanding, really. I mean, certainly in my experience of 3 organisations in the sector now, the reality in terms of agile working on sites is that generally it's already working somehow, but people perhaps don't realise what actually agile working is. You know, it isn't just things like home working. Usually you tend to find teams sit down as a matter of course, either on a Monday morning or at the end of the week, and actually decide between them how they're going to meet the client's needs, how they're going to cover those shifts, and actually take into account all sorts of team members' personal circumstances as part of those conversations. That's agile working. And they're the examples you need to draw out from your organisations to educate those who don't really understand it. You know, largely on sites, I've tended to find it already works. People don't realise they're actually doing it. Where they're doing it, it's very powerful when you tell others great examples of what those conversations actually are and how those things work in practice on projects. So getting examples of what already happens, I think, is great. It's probably the strongest case study you're going to get to change attitudes and behaviours where there still is currently scepticism about the ability for agile working to exist, particularly on projects. And I'm sure that that's something many people on this session can resonate with in particular. So just before I move on to some actual case studies of what I've been talking about in practice, I mean, just a bit of a recap. There is quite an important difference between flexible and agile working, but you know, I think we work in a sector that has such a variety of jobs and opportunities we can accommodate both. Some real key messages from me, based on lots of experience, would be there is no one size fits all with this, and no 2 jobs are the same. But your powerful examples and really the best investment you can make is educating people on having the conversation. So I'm going to show you now a few examples of where those types of conversation have actually resulted in agile working arrangements on projects that have been in place in one case for 3 years that really work. So if we could move on, Manon. So making it work on projects. This first example you can see, I'm not going to run through all the words on the slide, and I'll let you read it while I'm talking, but this was a great example for me of how agile working on a project should work. A quote from one of my project managers in the South. He said to me 6 months ago, well, when you talk about agile working, shouldn't it be just a natural part of great teamwork? And that really resonated with me. And some of the education we've done has actually been to include in things like our supervisory development program just that. So rather than saying, here's agile working, this is what it means, here's some options, actually it's all about being a good manager, talking to your team, and as you can see a quote in the bottom saying there's a culture of allowing flexibility. We talk about when personal needs come up, and in return you get a lot of stuff back from employees. And interestingly, this project manager said, if that conversation's what you call agile working, then we've always done it. This actually became over a year ago now in Murphy, a quote that's actually acted as a case study in itself for other projects, where actually there has been a bit of a view historically that this can't work there. It really makes people sit up and think, actually this isn't a project, this is an initiative, this is just a natural part of great teamwork, isn't it? Really something to think about. If you could move on, please, Manon. Another couple of examples. What we've been working quite hard to embed, and I've seen this work in other organisations as well, is really that concept on sites of using the talks you have as a team, whether that's every day, whether it's at the start of a week or at the end of the week, how we best work for our project and also ourselves in terms of delivery that week. And these were some examples, talking to one of our project managers in the north, of how he happens to do that day in, day out. All of this that you can see on here are great examples of agile working. Many of these are short-term arrangements, some of these are longer-term arrangements. But actually, again, these are very practical examples that as we've worked with other projects where perhaps this is less embedded, we've actually used to embed in understanding of what this actually means. The loyalty on both of the projects, both from the slide you saw earlier and this one, that we have as a result of this way of working is phenomenal. I'm sure everybody has carried out all sorts of surveys this year, particularly throughout the pandemic, asking all their employees how they feel about ways of working, how we could do things differently, learnings that we should keep for the future. These are conversations that were already happening. I think the pandemic has stimulated more of them, particularly where we've all had challenges like homeschooling, etc. But again, it's another great example of a project manager really getting this and saying, you just need to talk about this. Be open-minded to talk about it, even if you can't facilitate what everybody asks for. And if you can get to a point on a project where you sit down and talk as a team quite naturally at the start of every day, the start of every week, or as often as you want, about how we work best for our projects and ourselves, you're going a long way to start to embed a true agile working culture that isn't just about offices, can really work on construction projects as well. And just the final examples, I think really put this into context for me. If you could move on to the next slide, please, Manon. We are not going to change overnight the nature of what we do in our sector. And by that, I mean some of the hours our projects have to work, the fact that many of our jobs, particularly at project level, do still involve working away from home, do inevitably involve lots of travel, that they are the realities of what we do. But despite all of that, what you can see on here really resonate for me. There just happen to be a couple of examples again from my current business about how despite all of that and accepting that that's the sector we're in, you can actually still accommodate individuals' needs. And again, with no prompting, I talked to one of our senior site managers in Lancashire about 4 months ago. There'd been a number of challenges on that particular project with individuals' personal circumstances, and he just said, look, we work our way through all of these really easily. It's about regular conversations with the team and being an approachable manager. We do it. My team don't see anything new, but actually I'm happy to talk to others about how I do it if they don't understand that that's what agility is really all about. The hours on that project haven't changed. The client requirements haven't changed. We still have people traveling to that project from all over the country. The fact is they talk. And again, a really powerful case study for me about that whole culture and conversations thing, actually living and breathing on a project. So really, final slide from me are some key takeaways, I guess. I mentioned it's all about culture, and could you go back one, please, Manon? Thank you. Okay. So if I was to give 6 or 7 sort of key things to think about, I think to start to get the culture and conversation thing working, particularly on projects, I think it's well worth, in my experience, investing time and effort in helping people understand what agile working actually is, and more importantly, dispel some of the very traditional myths that we all know still exist. You're sick of me mentioning it, but this is the final time. You know, it is about culture and conversations rather than policies and procedures. You do need some parameters around it. You do need to review it. There has to be a bit of formality, but the key is that conversation. If you start those good conversations, you're not going to change your culture overnight, but the more examples you can share, I think the better. The more people that do it, the more people talk about it, the more people see that there's something in it. And it sounds simple, but I would informally look for good examples of where agile working is already happening. Where I've seen the best examples come out is not where you go out with a presentation, for example, on what agile working is. You simply ask your team some very simple questions on your project as to what they already do. And I would highlight the commercial as well as the cultural benefits. I mentioned earlier, particularly for people, sometimes at the more senior levels who might be a bit sceptical. I think that really translates it into a language our sector understands. And all of this is about being practical. You know, even if you have to say no to an arrangement, I think the key is leaving people feeling like I can have a conversation about this at any time. I know it has to be workable for me and for my project or my business, but I know I can talk about these things because the organisation believes in it. And that's the note I'd sort of like to leave everybody with, really. It's all about the culture and the conversations, in my experience. And I think hopefully the case studies I've given you from some very recent projects that I've spoken to bear that out. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Dawn. That was great. I'm very aware that we're overrunning, so I'm not even going to bother to switch my video on. I am going to just hand straight over to Ricky Pratt, Senior General Foreman working on behalf of Costain on High Speed 2, who's going to talk about his experience. So Ricky, straight over to you.
Hello everybody. Yeah, I've been quite fortunate now that I think this is the 3rd time that I've actually done one of these, so quite a bit of experience with it. First started it 2 years ago on the enabling works, and now we've brought it over to my 2nd project of the main work. So if you could forward the next slide, please. And the next one. So yeah, 17,000 new roles to fill to deliver the whole of the HS2 project. Flexible working is the #1 reason a candidate joins a new employer. So when I actually start doing the case study for this flexible working, you'd be surprised the amount of phone calls that I got when everybody heard on the project that I'm doing it. Everybody wanted to come and work for us, which was very nice. A foreman is expected to be on site from start to finish. So long hours affected. This is a bit of my personal life. I lost, I had 2 kids, 2 different women, and they both split up with me because I was doing over hours at work. So it does play a major big scale in life, especially with broken homes and the kids. The site office can be a hard place to concentrate. So by Costain's we've got a My Learning, so we've got e-learning stuff that we do on there, unconscious bias and stuff like that. So it's very hard for a foreman to come in and actually use his computer to catch up on these learning modules. So what better place to do it at home in your own environment. Next slide, please. So yeah, blockers. So when we first actually come to present this to the directors and project managers, they wasn't very on board with it to begin with. They were quite negative to say, look, it's not going to work. So I said, well, let me do the case study, let me trial it, and if I fail, you can say I told you so, but it won't stop me there. I will keep going until it works. So what we done a 4-week trial. So every 2 weeks, the foreman will work flexibly at home for half a day. We've done a timesheet of what they've done at home. So I'd assign them stuff on e-learning like unconscious bias, manager's toolkit 1 and 2. So once they completed this, I'd speak to my HR to make sure that it had been done. And we put a rota system together. So we had a 6-week look ahead. We do a team meeting every week, and we have a look at a 6-week look ahead at where we can place people for flexible working. So that was the business case we put together. We presented the results and the guidelines that we wrote up to the directors, and from then they rolled it out for all foremen and all of the engineers because we proved that it worked. Next slide, please. So yeah, we looked at site access systems. So we've got a system here called Mosaic. For the people that was working flexibly, we just wanted to make sure that they're not clocking out too late, the people that are covering them, or they're not clocking in too early, to make sure they're not doing too many hours for the cover, and nobody was doing that, which was good. 100% reported the benefits, their workload and work-life balance and their mental health. Productivity remained the same. We actually come 2 months ahead of schedule with one asset on the project and about £500,000 under budget. So we proved then that, look, we're doing all of this flexible working, we still come 2 months ahead of schedule and £500,000 under budget. The team wanted to stay together for future projects. I'm currently now on the main works, and I still speak to the same team on the enabling work, so hopefully they'll merge over with us. Next slide, please. So what was the impact to mental health? Like I said, so this is a few statements from my foremen and engineers. So I took my wife to a hospital appointment, and that was a chap called Surinder Singh. I was able to have dinner with my wife and child. So when we get home, you know, we don't get home until 7, half 7 at night sometimes, if we finish work at 6, half 6. So 9 times out of 10, we don't eat with our partners or our children. So they're the little things that matter. I've reviewed rounds and TBSs. That was Taj, one of our engineers. As you know yourself, when you're sitting by a desk in the office, you get 10, 12, 14 people a day come up to you for a conversation. Well, them 10-minute conversations add up. You lose a lot of time for reviewing paperwork for that. So if you are at home doing it, you actually take that out of it. So you've got more time with your laptop. I was able to get a good night's sleep. That was Andy Evans. Yeah, he was working late hours, long hours, getting up early in the morning. So we actually said to him, look, have a lay-in in the morning, come in at 10 o'clock, you know, and you can finish at 3 o'clock, get home and have something to eat with your family. I did my unconscious bias on e-learning, which is a prime one. We've all got these courses. I'm pretty sure all the other companies are the same. It's like I said, it's hard for us as foremen to catch up on these courses. We could probably do 2 or 3 of them at home in a half working day. I could revise for my exams. So Taylor Edwards, he was one of my assistant foremen who was doing a degree at university, and he was finding it hard for all of the work that he was doing on site to revise for his exams. So I actually gave him 1 day every 2 weeks that he could work from home for him to cover. Not only with that, when the foremen were working from home, I'd actually replace Taylor in their place. So he would get a bit more learning actually on site of what foreman does for his next stage of his career. I saw my daughter in a school play. Now, it's like I say, these are big things for us that we miss out on. That was Andy Evans. He'd never seen his daughter in a school play before. This is the first time. Next page, please. So there's 4 key things you've got to do. So find a champion. I mean, when you find a champion, find somebody that really wants to do this. Don't find somebody that says, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll look at it, because they're not the right people. We talk about behaviours. Now, I was very keen for this, and I'm glad that Alice Jennings, our environmental manager, brought this to me. Give ownership to the team. So when you are sitting in your team meetings, ask them, what days do you want to work flexibly? You know, at the end of the day, it's flexible. Flexible working on the site requires guidelines. So yeah, if we've got people on holiday or someone's gone sick and we can't cover it, then we can't do it, unfortunately. Use a pilot and get a buy-in and find the best solutions. So we didn't get it right first time, don't get me wrong. There were some site engineers that needed to be on site, so we actually spoke to one of the engineers, Hannah her name was. She wanted to do the gym in the morning for twice a week. It was only 2 hours, so we was like, fine, no problem, we can cover 2 hours in the morning. Next slide, please. So yeah, like I say, I've done a couple of these now, and I was quite happy that I won the award in 2018. But don't forget, flexible working doesn't mean to say you have to work from home. So we had a family day on site where we opened the site up to all of the people in the office, all of the operatives, to say, look, let's bring your loved ones into site. Let's show them all of the wonderful work that you're doing. So we've done this for half a day, walked around the whole site. We got a couple of machines doing little tricks for the kids. So yeah, it was really good. Next slide, please. So this is part of the main works. So as of the COVID-19, the pandemic, I've not really called it flexible working because it's not. So the key challenges and risks was trying to accommodate childcare throughout the pandemic. Now my wife still works, so I had to work from home every Monday and Friday. It's not up to her to be looking after our child all the time. Why should she have time off work when we should be doing that as well? Now that was very hard for me because I'm in my son's environment now, and you know, when I'm on a Teams call, and bearing in mind he's only 6, every time he's coming up to me and I'm trying to talk, it is pretty frustrating. Because I can't give him the full attention that he deserves. So making sure that we have the right amount of cover on site. As you can see, all of the yellows there is the home working. This is all of the foremen that I've got on site and the superintendent. We managed to do it. It was challenging, but because we had like different sections of works out there, we was able to get this for the whole month and delegate where people are going. Home working was mandatory due to the pandemic. It's flexible, which is, like I said, for me, this wasn't flexible working because we had to do it. Get the right setup for people working from home. Now, getting your laptops working from home, making sure you're set up properly. So I said to everybody, look, if you haven't got chairs and everything at home, I'll take them all out of the office, I'll put them in the pickup, and we'll get it delivered to you so you set up comfortably. Managing staff's mental health and well-being while working from home. Well, not everybody wants to work from home, even though we had to work from home. This was the biggest challenge into supporting them. So just having that one-to-one conversation with the people that are working from home. Look, are you okay? Have we set you up okay? And you know, if you've got children running about, let me know what time you want to have a break with your children. It's no problem, yeah? Getting to work due to not being able to public transport. So we was banned from using public transport, especially the underground. So we actually spoke to the board and said, look, we need to get some car parking around here so people can actually get to work. So we did. We went to all the car park places out there. We managed to get one at the zoo, and they give us 30 to 50 car parking spaces. So we was able to get people to work. If we can do this in the pandemic, why can't we do this as a standard? It's like everybody has been forced to do this now. So why not take this now as the, I mean, all of these home working that I've got there, why not change all of them to flexible working now? Next slide, please. So this is part of the main works project. So this is what we do on the main works. So working hours as a personal schedule. Agree your schedule with your line manager. If you work long on the same day, you can take up to 2 days off as a result without using your annual leave. Our core hours are between 10 and 3, so you can actually start later and finish earlier if you like. And you can work from home 1 day every 2 weeks. So there's some people here actually doing 9 day over a fortnight because they feel it works for them. Next slide, please. So this is just a bit on statistics on the main work through an email that went out just for these here, and this is what come back. So flexible working was the third priority when choosing a job. So you can see there, the first one is obviously salary. We all want as much money as possible. Interest in the project, yeah, and then obviously flexible working was number 3. If you could move to the next slide, please. So 84% of the team said productivity stayed the same or improved for office-based staff whilst working from home. As you can see there, 99% reported meeting work objectives. 93% have introduced new ways to become accountable. Next slide, please. And yeah, 95% of our team feel they can work from home for 1 day a week. So as you can see there, in my professional opinion, at peak delivery, I can work agilely, productively. So this is all what went out across the whole of the enabling work, whole of the main works, and this is what has come back. Next slide, please. Yep, so COVID has taught us people are individuals, to get to know your team and celebrate their unique strengths. They have different personalities, they have different home lives. Some may live on their own, others may have young kids. They have different reasons for working, different drivers. They respond differently to change. So we need to keep these different perspectives in mind when we talk about flexible working. Not everybody, I mean, a lot of people work from home, yeah? Not everybody wants to work flexibly. I get like hourly paid people want to work as many hours as they can to get as much money as they can. So why not say like, okay, well, you do 10.5 hours a day and every other week you can have half a day off, and that will counter out like how much money they earn will stay the same. I get we live in a big commercial world now, and I get everybody's there like the clocking in system. If we're letting an operative go early, it clocks out the system, suddenly it gets flagged as commercial and they get deducted. These are all the challenges that we have. Just a few more bits for me other than these slides. I think that was the last slide, Manon, wasn't it? Yeah, so just a couple more.
We're a bit tight for time, Ricky. Well, we're overrunning.
All right, we'll leave it there and I'll just answer any questions that come through, no problem.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ricky, and thanks to all the speakers. As I say, we are overrunning, and I don't want to bite too much into the comfort break that you've got now, or into Eileen's session. So there's 2 questions that I've identified. If all the speakers could please put their cameras on and unmute themselves, and I'm going to ask Sue Pickerel and Steve Fox to ask their questions. So Steve, perhaps you would start, because it's just picking up on something that Ricky mentioned about hourly paid tradespeople. So Steve, are you there? Are you able to ask your question?
Yeah, I think so. Can you hear me?
Hi, Steve.
All right, thank you, everybody. Hang on, someone's flipped just about, oh, start my video. Hang on. How do I do that? Buttons, just, oh, it's on, right. Hi, yeah, thanks everybody. Okay, let's just try and keep it quick, really. And particularly at the start, you made a passing comment about the bricklayers. I think it's really important to show that we create this change across the whole of the employee base, and don't let it become perceived as something that's just in the domain of the management. I mean, one of the challenges before COVID was flexible working was seen as the domain of senior management, and trying to break that. I think the last 4 months has really helped show that everybody's got a right to work flexibly or agile, in an agile way, Dawn. I'll take your word, take the difference of what you're saying. But the really important thing is about how we also make this accessible for everybody on a project. So you talked about the bricklayers, and I'd like to know a little bit more about what you've done, how much you've achieved, how are bricklayers working flexibly or agilely, and what sort of take-ups have been. Can you give us a bit more insight into the hourly paid operatives, please?
Yeah, and I guess your point around really important that we that you want to, I guess, have this change across your entire business. I think it's equally important to recognise that all of the roles are different, and it's not possible to have the same levels of change in all roles. And I think if we truly think about inclusion, that's where, you know, just having a kind of blanket approach isn't always the right thing, in particular for our business. So with our bricklayers, for instance, they are hourly paid individuals and they want to work as many hours as they can because they want to be able to, you know, they work based on they get bonuses based on how many bricks they lay. But what we do have is we have the so for instance, there is already agile working happening in many of our sites, which are informal arrangements around you know, leaving early to go and attend various appointments, making up the time afterwards. Friday afternoons might be times that on a site they agree that they're going to finish work early. And of course, then we do have our flexible working, which is where individuals want to reduce their hours. What we found is people don't really want to reduce their hours. What they really appreciate is the ability for us to give them flexibility so they can partake in their personal responsibilities outside of work. So that's where I think, you know, sometimes when you kind of limit yourself by saying everyone must have this opportunity, and actually where we came to was absolutely where you can, and let's have the conversation. And what we found is some individuals have said, well, if you're going to be transparent with me, actually it's not something I want, and I want to be able to do my job during these hours, and then I choose to then not have to come to work during the hours that I don't have to. So that's the way that we've done it at Taylor Wimpey. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it's a difficult area. Oh, sorry, we're running out of time. We can have a long conversation about
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Alan, for answering that.
Amna.
Amna, sorry.
That's it.
I was looking at somebody else's name. Now, Sue Pickerel had a really good question, which was, I think, relevant to everybody. Sue, are you there? Can you switch on your video and unmute and ask your very excellent question, please?
I am here. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi there. So I think some of the examples that have been shared in terms of, you know, sort of the odd person where a manager is just sort of taking account of their individual circumstances, that's fine. But I'm really interested in how this is applied at scale. I think some of the stuff that Ricky was talking about in terms of actually implementing this maybe across the board with, you know, the structure of, you know, a half day, a fortnight, or a day at home, a fortnight. And I'm interested in terms of how that has worked at scale. So it's not just one or two people, but it's actually trying to implement it for everybody, and almost trying to encourage people to, you know, take better care of their mental health by having that time out. Perhaps maybe then they necessarily would do individually if you just left them to it, almost by putting in that structure where everybody's encouraged to be perhaps rotated. Just sort of interested in how that's worked at scale.
So can we have a quick answer from Dawn, Anna, and then Ricky?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I could really resonate with the work plan, as I call it, that Ricky showed about, you know, his particular HS2 project. So where it works at scale is our teams have those, and over the last couple of years have very actively, so used either a Monday morning, a Friday, or a briefing at the end of the week to work out those working arrangements. I think the big thing, and where the real agility comes in, is that pattern will not look the same in terms of what people are working one week to another. And I don't mean they change their shift patterns. It's as a result of the discussion about those individual circumstances, but how the team accommodates that. And I think that's a really positive step forward in getting things like that to work at scale across your organisation. It was working much earlier and much better on some projects in my current organisation and others, and still is. But it's a way of doing it informally, but very impactfully.
Great. So having that flexibility to change that schedule each week, not have a fixed schedule.
Yeah, and I think the big bit, the discussion about how that team works, just becoming part of the whole project planning process, if you like, on a regular basis. So it's a big thing. I
suppose in terms of appointments and those sort of things, that makes total sense, but it may look different.
But also in terms of client delivery as well. I think I mentioned, so I know we need to be quick, you may have, you know, 12-hour shifts on a site, but how you deliver for that client can be down to the effectiveness of that team and that discussion.
Yeah.
I think one of our project managers said it's about, you know, doing the best for our project, but also for ourselves and our work-life balance.
Yeah.
Amna, Ricky, have you got something to add?
Sorry, go ahead, Ricky. Ricky, you go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So just that's the key thing about the weekly meetings. Change is what slips us up all the time. Now, don't forget it is flexible. Yeah, I mean, if you've got quiet spells at work, why have half a day? Have a day. You know, it doesn't have to be half a day. Once you've got your certain structure in, you build on that. All I would say to everybody is just go out and do it and make mistakes. You know, it's no different to what I done 2 years ago, but you'll learn from it and you'll find a way how to do it.
So that half a day, Ricky, is that, because I was a bit confused. In one of the slides it talked about a half a day, and then in another slide it looked like it was a day working at home. So is it half a day that people have effectively off and they've made up those hours in the rest of the week? Or is it a working at home day, or is it a combination of the two?
So the half a day was Enabling Works. That was the project where we piloted it. Now I'm on a separate project, which is Main Works. They've come up with a different pilot. So the half a day was, if they wanted to do a little bit more hours during the week, they could have that half a day at home off.
Right.
Yeah, but it all depends now. Like you're governed by Section 61s for say, so you can't work later than 6 o'clock anyway. So how are we going to mitigate against working against that? Well, you work in the office then for an extra half an hour, and you build your days up. Other than that, that half a day at home, like I say, look at your RAMs, look at your TBSs, do some online courses. Because don't forget, one foreman come up to me and said, Ricky, I've got sausage fingers. I'm no good on a computer. So I said, okay, so I need to get you some training on a computer. So stay at home and we'll get you some online courses for the computer. So it's all stuff like this we're actually learning about our own people.
So they might do that one day working at home and half a day is work and half a day is off.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. That's really useful.
So Anna, I'm going to give you final 2 minutes and then we're going to wrap it up.
Manon, actually, Dawn and Ricky have summed that up brilliantly, so I won't duplicate what they've said. All
right, thanks for that, Amna. Give us a bit more time. So many thanks to everybody. Apologies to those who asked really great questions that we weren't able to get to. What we're going to do is I've asked Bryony if we can record the chat, so all the questions that are in the chat, and if there are any that we can just bounce out to our speakers and get them to respond, then we will do that. And yes, the slides are going to be available afterwards for everybody that asked that question as well. So we've got, the programme says we've got a 5-minute break. I would ask everybody to just make that as tight as possible, perhaps just stand up, shake your legs and sit back down again. And I'm going to hand over the control of this screen now to Eileen Donnelly from Ripple & Co, who's going to be our next speaker. So thank you very much to all of our speakers. Thanks to Bryony for organising, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, Manon. Okay, so yeah, just 2-3 minutes, and then we will begin the next part of the webinar. So I'll see you soon. Our timing is quite tight. So just to reiterate what Manon had said, the slides will be available, and it's critical that I say that to you because I've got a lot of content on my slides, and I'm not going to have time to go into all of it. So I want you to know that you will have access to all the detail of the content that I've got on my slides. But first off, just a little bit of an introduction to me. My career traditionally has actually been in-house in corporate. I have worked in the field of corporate responsibility for about 20 years, latterly as a director in a global FTSE 250. And about 3 years ago, I stepped out of what probably was a comfort blanket of the corporate world, and I started my own business called Ripple & Co. And the focus has been very much on what I think is the most critical of corporate responsibilities, and that is the investment that the employer makes in you as the human capital of the organisation, the ones who are actually delivering that bottom line. And companies often say that employees are their greatest asset. They're also the most expensive, and they're also the biggest liability if they get it wrong. And the times are changing, and therefore we need to change how we're managing our employees and what that investment looks like into their well-being and their productivity. And I will link those two very, very closely together. Now, we're going to use Menti through the course of this just a few times to make sure you're all still awake. So let's give it a bit of a test out. Hopefully you've got a separate device, whether that's just a mobile or whatever it be, where you can log on to menti.com, and then you can take part in the couple of different questions that we're going to be, if I can work my slides, in the, that isn't working, 1 second. There we go. Right. So the idea is you log on to menti.com, you put in that code, and then you type in your job title. And I really hope that what we see is a word cloud of all your different work job titles. That's what I'm hoping. If that doesn't, it's just going to go out into the ether somewhere, never to be seen again. So let's see if that works. I'm not seeing anything yet. Anyone logged on? There we go. People seeing that? I hope you are. It's a nice mix there. It's very clever, isn't it? It always still delights me when I see that. Brilliant. Thank you very much for doing that. We're going to give that another go with a couple of different questions as we go through. Just wanted to check that it was working. Okay. So what I'm going to do over the course of the next 45 minutes or so is I'm going to start off with the challenges. What situation have we got, and therefore how can we address it? I'm going to start off with the macro environment, and then I'll move on to internal and personal. So what is the macro environment that we have all been living with since what, 23rd of March? Well, the spring forecast for the 27 EU states, not got them all listed here, was that there would be a GDP growth of around about 1.2% this year. Clearly, that is not the case anymore. The economic havoc that the pandemic has wrought means that now, sorry, that was a bit too soon, we're now actually going to see a contraction of 7.4 on average across all those EU states. To put that in context, the financial crisis of 2009, we saw a decline of 4.5. They're now predicting a decline of 7.4. This is bigger than the 2008-2009 financial crisis. So what does this mean in terms of different industries when it comes to their trading and their turnover? So those who have been continuing to trade have said they've seen a 57% decrease outside of their normal range of turnover. And then for construction in particular, it looks like this. It's actually slightly higher. It's 59.4% decrease in trading outside of that normal range. So again, huge amounts of uncertainty. And then what did we see perhaps on a more personal level? We saw a massive amount of closures, and it was pretty much instantaneous in many cases. Huge amounts of panic started to set in. I mean, can we remember the loo roll crisis we had? There was panic buying. Week one, it was tracked that people were buying medicines for the family, cleaning supplies, tissues. They did buy more because sales of reusable shopping bags went up by 177%. In week two, key pantry items, emergency healthcare products, children's medicines went up by a massive 124%. People were panic buying. So this is all the context that within which we are moving into our lockdown. So what does that mean within the internal environment of the business? 30% of UK employees had ever worked from home in 2019, and that jumped almost overnight to 60%. A massive, massive change, which for many organisations has actually seen an increase in productivity. But I had a client who only had enough laptops for 10% of their workforce. So that is not going to be an easy transition for them to deal with. But it isn't even just that sort of the physical aspects. It's also, what are the communication channels like? And as Dawn was pointing out, can your culture absorb the challenges of a workforce that is predominantly working from home? Not necessarily. Now, in terms of different industries, obviously working from home looks quite different. And for construction, as you would expect, because there's a lot of site workers, it was less than 60%, but it was still a significant change for the industry as a whole. Now, what about our personal environment, which is really the one that has probably been impacted the most? Well, it all started with Boris, his very serious announcement that brought us a lockdown. And then, of course, we started to get those daily updates on the number of deaths. So some really significant negative news. But then we started to hear about the fact that the NHS was overwhelmed and there wasn't enough PPE equipment. So we then started to see that even if we did become unwell, that actually our NHS, our wonderful NHS, might be overwhelmed and not able to respond and make us better. So then we started to see the Nightingale hospitals being built, more fear setting in all the time around this. And then, of course, anyone with children, and it has been evidence now that those in particular who have got preschool children have experienced massive amounts of stress. But how the heck do you work remotely when you're perhaps sharing a kitchen table with children? Really difficult. And actually, you're not only sharing the table with them, but you're also their teacher at the same time. I speak from experience. Not an easy place to be in. Then we start to move to this idea of a new normal. But no one really defines what that looks like. And we hear about big employers saying, actually, we're going to have a permanent work from home situation. And certainly I have friends who are not intending to go back into the office until July 2021. That's the furthest out I've heard about. And then lo and behold, the thing that we treasure the most, our time off, foreign holidays being cancelled, lockdown if you come back, isolation if you come back from a holiday. So this was really starting to get quite personal, if it hadn't already for so many of us. So let's try our menti.com thing again. Let's ask the question. So for you personally, what has been the biggest challenge during the pandemic so far? Whether it's one that has dissipated, it's one that came in right at the beginning, you're no longer struggling with that, or one that actually has crept upon you the longer that this has gone on. So this is for you personally. We'll deal with the work one before. So if you want to put in your answers to that one, and hopefully we will see a lovely cloud appear on what people have been. Uncertainty, huge up there. It's the one that the Office of National Statistics has come up with time and again. The unknown. We do not like knowing what's going to happen. Furlough, technology. Never had so many online meetings, not seeing the family. Shared space, really hard, not working. Job security is a huge one. The uncertainty around, will I have a job? Yeah. And what's interesting here is, yes, there are some that are in common, but actually we have all experienced this so differently. Not enough room in the flat. Yeah, I always feel for those who don't have their own outdoor space, perhaps in a flat share situation, the connection with people outside of their home. I mean, it just goes on and on, so I won't get too miserable about it, but absolutely, it's been hard, and it's been really hard in so many different ways. Thank you for sharing those. So it's no wonder that we have found it really, really hard to stay motivated and in many respects stay focused. And certainly from a survey done by YouGov, sponsored by the Institute of Workplace Facilities Managers, and they came up tops with this staying focused. Distractions are very close second though. So even if you have got your own space to work in at home, I know the door on my study makes absolutely no difference. I still get my 5 and 7-year-old bowling in. It's difficult. Thankfully they're not here today, so it shouldn't happen. But this is really going to have a knock-on impact on how you manage your team when actually they are really struggling with all the challenges that the home working is bringing. But it's different for different people. So let's just have a look at that. So yellow, you're probably working from a kitchen table or a sofa. Blue, you've got your own dedicated space. So look at the difference that we're seeing as a result of the age profile. Who has a separate study, and what impact is that having? Now, there are always going to be positives and there's always going to be negatives. One of the positives, just to bring us a teeny little bit of light into this conversation, is on average, workers are going to be saving around about £44, £45 every week because they're not commuting and they're not buying lunch out. The negative of that, of course, is that we're not buying our lunch out, then that's obviously affecting the economics of those who we would normally buy our lunch from. But actually, this is really significant when you look at what people are saying about when I've got a desk and I've got a workspace, what does that mean for me? Excuse me, just dropping my notes. And then when I'm working from sofa, how does that impact me? Again, the details of this will be with you, so don't worry about having to read all of this. But this is changing over time. This lockdown has gone on, the restrictions have gone on for a while. So when we're looking at an extended period of time, whether you're in an office or you're on your sofa, 1 in 5 of remote workers saying they're now starting to struggle with loneliness. So if you don't have a dedicated space, you've got all of those trials and tribulations. But even if you have, you're probably working longer hours in order to fit in the personal responsibilities you've got. So on average, CIPD have said that employers are working an additional 29 hours every single month. Now, depending on what that work looks like, that could equal potential move towards burnout. So that's the complete reduction in that work-life balance, and the fact that you feel like you're always switched on and you're basically getting system overload, personal system overload. And for some, the inequalities that existed before lockdown have really been emphasized. So women in particular, so great, Ricky, that you've been doing childcare, but actually in the main, women have found this more difficult because they're juggling the childcare at the same time. So it's great to have some examples of where that's not happening, but when we're talking about national statistics, actually the pandemic has really emphasized the existing inequalities that we've got. So just putting it bluntly, you aren't working from home. You're at home working during a crisis and you're trying to do some work. It really is that difficult. But furlough came up on that word cloud, and I want to touch on that because it's important, particularly if you're managing people in a team who are also furloughed. So 9.3 million workers have been furloughed. 81% of them are fearing future redundancy. So not many people have had the furlough experience of sipping pims in the garden when we had that heat wave. It's not been like that at all. Many businesses have realized just how much they can manage without particular members of staff, because maybe the business has pivoted, or they now realize that actually someone else can do that job, whatever it be. So there's a very real fear for people, and that is over a sustained period of time. So anxiety levels have been high, stress is high. Now, the Office of National Statistics has been tracking this since lockdown. So just last month, I've pulled off last month's data. The uncertainty, the worry about the future, that's what 65% of people are worried about. 68% are feeling anxious and stressed. Now, the levels of anxiety have not plateaued. They have not plateaued or reduced. They're going up. Other statistics like life satisfaction, feeling of worthwhile, are now coming back to more of a normal level. Anxiety isn't, it's still high. 57% of people are saying that actually COVID in one shape or another is impacting their work. So while some say, yes, I'm being more productive, actually it is still impacting work, whether they might be more productive, but it might be a lack of work-life balance. So some significant statistics there. So let's try another question. What is the biggest challenge that you have had in managing your team remotely? Now that's either you personally or challenges that you know exist within the business around people managing their team remotely. So if you want to put, you can put more than one word in for this one. I think we've got a couple of 2 or 3 options if you want to throw more than one answer in here. So what have you been challenged with? Motivation, duty of care. Yeah, childcare. Trust is an interesting one because I think that plays directly to what Dawn was talking about with culture. Getting active conversations. Yeah, we have to plan our communication now because it usually means picking up the phone or dialing into a meeting. Whereas spontaneous conversations, what they call weak tie communications, were things that would just happen naturally over grabbing a cup of tea, walking into the office. ensuring they feel valued, supporting them. Are they really okay? I'm working with a client at the moment who is saying, I think it's okay, but I don't know. Delayed response times, yeah. Maintaining contact, managing expectations, motivating, so many things. Yeah, there's a huge amount there. I'm going to cover quite a few of those, hopefully. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Quite a lot there, isn't there? Yeah. Okay. So let's have a look at what we might be able to do. Thank you so much for putting those in. So if we're not tackling all of these challenges, we have a productivity issue. Of course we do. We already had a productivity issue. In fact, it's called the productivity crisis. So the chief economist, literally just, a month before lockdown was being talked about, or the pandemic was being talked about in the media, I listened to a webinar by Andy Haldane, and yeah, we're at an all-time low of productivity already. He basically calls it the efficiency work theory. That's his answer. And what he's basically saying, simply put, if we can provide people with quality work, we will increase their productivity. And I'm kind of referring a little bit to what Bryony was talking about. It's actually get your basics, get the fundamentals right, and actually people will feel better, productivity will increase. Now, there are key elements that constitute what quality work, good work is. Now, I don't have time for all of them, obviously, on this particular webinar, but if you can get those right, then you will see productivity increase. So I'm going to zone down on just a couple of those. A lot of this is around well-being, ultimately good mental health. And we would expect that if someone's feeling good, they're going to work well. Of course, we expect that gut instinct, but I've got the data to prove it, because I think it's important. We can always couch this in evidence. So a study that was done by Oxford Research Centre, published last October, a 6-month survey, 1.8 million workers in call centres from BT. So a massive sample. Very, very simply, a conclusion was, after monitoring people on a weekly basis, self-reported feelings of being very unhappy through to happy, they saw a 13% increase in sales, which is massive, because this literally doesn't involve major expense and interventions to create a happier workforce. So, and we'll come on to some of that. So this isn't about spending more time at work and having longer hours. This is about the emotional state of people so they can be more efficient and more productive. And interestingly, this wasn't just about an increase in sales. They were actually able to retain more customers as well. Now that involves more emotional intelligence, because the calls would be more complex, and even that they saw a greater percentage of customers being retained as well. So how do we tackle this? These are 5 key drivers, evidence-based 5 key drivers of well-being in the workplace. They will impact, improve well-being, and therefore productivity in the workplace. I'm going to zone down on relationships, because we're now going to be talking about managers specifically, because this is what this is about. So health and relationships actually tie for first place in the most important. So I'm going to look at relationships, because obviously we don't have time for all of them. Which is the most important relationship? So have a think about that. But they absolutely do come top. As long as your pay is, you're happy with your pay, then relationships comes top, then it's how interested you are in your job, and then it's pay after that. So again, Oxford's Research Centre came up with that one. So it's the manager, of course. 70% of our motivation is influenced by our manager. However, 75% believe that the most stressful part of their job is their boss. So if we don't get it right, we get it really, really wrong. But if we get it right, then actually we can have a very positive impact as a manager. So what motivates employees in this very volatile, uncertain environment that we're living in at the moment? Well, authority. People like very clear expectations of what is expected of them. So clear parameters, clear boundaries. That authority is very, very important. It gives that stable base. So it's not about seizing the power and being domineering and controlling. It's about creating an environment where you can share it, but they want to believe and trust their leadership. Also, it's very important to have similar values. So it's alignment to corporate values, but also their belief in what their contribution is. And you've got this idea of an identity of belonging to a group with that. People like to belong and identify with a group, but they also want self-purpose as well. So it's their individual aspiration. They know what their role is, but they also know they can grow in it. They've got this forward momentum and a belief in their personal worth within this system. These actually map quite nicely over, they're kind of an adaptation from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, I'm not going to go through all the detail of this, there's not enough time, but you can see how the very basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this has actually been translated by Tony Robbins, love him or hate him, and he identifies 6 elements which I think map really nicely over authority, values and purpose. And I just want to point to another survey that was done by Gallup. During high stress times, that's where we find ourselves, the management approach needs to be very much about going back to basics. This is about clarifying expectations, reviewing needs of your team, and then readjusting so that people can really leverage their strengths, perhaps in new ways. So very important. So what does this mean in practice for our managers? Well, we know that management practices, when good, have a significant impact. And there's been a piece of research that was done on NHS trusts. And they found where good people management practices existed, the trusts were over 3 times more likely to have lower levels of sickness absence. They were at least 4 times more likely to have satisfied patients, so customers, more than twice as likely to have higher levels of job satisfaction, and more than 3 times likely to have staff with the highest levels of engagement. So it makes a significant difference. Now, Google did a little bit around this. They spent 2 years researching what makes remote teams successful. And they found that actually, if they had an approach where their managers had this idea of a T check-in, so T, thoughts, E, energy, A, attention, and you check on that at the beginning of every meeting with people, or maybe your team meetings and your individual one-to-ones. And what you're doing is, where are their thoughts, where's their energy, and where is their attention right now and for the rest of the week? And that's going to start to uncover where they are in terms of their psychological well-being. What is their psychological state? Now, we are moving into a management style that is quite coaching in its approach. But this is important, and this is where management styles may need to be adapted. And let's face it, this is going to be a heck of a lot cheaper than hiring new people or even new managers because of poor well-being, burnout, stress, whatever it might be. So for some people, this might be about turning up the positivity within their team. They might be able to identify those who are a little bit glass half empty. Try not to get the downward spiral of negative conversations. Seek out ways of trying to make conversations more positive, alternative ways of looking at it. That is the responsibility of the manager. It is about setting clear boundaries and expectations. 90% of conflicts at work come from unarticulated expectations of people and their teams. And all of this could just be avoided if the management style includes absolute clarity and transparency. So it's about creating the right communication channels. We'll come on to that in a tick. Meetings, who needs to be there, who doesn't. It's very easy to just jump onto webinars and team meetings and Zoom calls and Skype calls. Do these people really need to be there? If you were in a physical office, would you be calling them in to that physical meeting? They perhaps don't need to be there. And then schedules, it's absolutely vital. We have seen just how different people are during lockdown. We have to adapt and flex around people's personal challenges. They're in their own home, and we absolutely have to be respectful of that. And if we are, you'll get their loyalty and trust, and that will come back 10 times if you ever do go back into the office. Really important to help teams feel connected to the purpose. What is their role? What's the purpose of the organisation? How as a team are you pulling together to meet that purpose? And through that, you get that team spirit and you build the team trust as well. So it may be about re-emphasising that purpose at this time. QR code there and a link. The link's on the last slide as well, for a guide that I've written on managing remotely, which you can access on a website. So I do suggest that managers have a look at what their style might be, because some of these styles might need adapting. Some of them, that there are good bits and bad bits to these different types of styles. You know, the achiever is, you know, will win at all costs, but then they fear failure, and they perhaps drive other people to exhaustion. The hero, fantastic, always steps up, knows what to do when others don't, but probably takes on a little bit more than necessary, doesn't trust that other people can do it. The lone wolf, highly capable person, maybe you've got some in your team, brilliant, doesn't need much support or guidance, but they don't allow other people to help them, and they may fail to delegate. Are you a lone wolf and you're taking on too much? The mentor, really nice coaching management style, very, very collaborative, but perhaps doesn't put personal boundaries in place. So maybe you spend all day coaching your team, and by the end of it, you realize you haven't done any of your own work, and therefore you're working longer hours. The analyst, fantastic, mitigates all the risks by having a backup plan, plan B, plan C, identifies potential failure points, but perhaps excessive need for detail, box checking rather than stopping at the good enough answer, perhaps stops things from moving forward. Perfectionist, similar, but very good at communicating complex concepts. Beautiful documents, good attention to detail, but maybe just spends a little bit too long in getting it to the perfect state. So I think for managers, really important to understand your style and then understand the impact that might have on your team and how you might need to adapt it as well. So one of the biggest issues we've had, and Dawn was talking about that conversation, communication has been so difficult because it's been so much more singular in how we do it. We've got way less of the informal face-to-face bumping into each other. You can't ask for immediate help. Delayed response times came up in the word cloud. Very difficult for you to role model behaviors as a manager when you're not in the same physical space. And then, of course, we don't know the personal challenges and the work-life balance that people need when they're actually working in their home. So these barriers have been very, very obvious, and many of them have absolutely not gone away at all. So we need to adapt how we're communicating and take opportunities to connect in the way that we would have done if we were in the same space. Now, whilst this is hugely unspontaneous, I do recommend writing down how would I talk and for what reasons would I talk to my team. And then you start to then plan in how you then still have those types of conversations, but they're either by the telephone or they're by video call. And then you'll realize just how many times you do talk to your people and how you then need to plan these in, need to schedule them in. And actually sometimes, is it about making sure that you're not on the internet and on a Zoom call, but actually you're taking a walk and having a conversation while you're out getting some fresh air? There needs to be a balance. But checking in with people regularly is absolutely critical, because you would have seen so much more face-to-face in the office than you ever will when you're on a Zoom call or a Skype call. And let's face it, we take so much of a sense of what's being communicated by the body language. Now, whilst you can still see everyone, there is a lot of cues that you're missing because you just can't see it. And especially if you're on a team meeting and you've got a few people in your team, you're seeing a little tile. You know, you're not seeing the whole thing. And actually, we're not quite sure where the eye contact is. The brain is on overload, trying to access all those non-verbal cues. And it won't find them, but it doesn't stop looking for them. So it's exhausting. So actually, if you're in back-to-back online meetings, you'll wonder perhaps why at the end of the day, you're absolutely exhausted. Your brain has been working overtime to read non-verbal cues that are not there. You just can't see them. So take the opportunity to do a one-to-one check-in, or maybe it's you know, having a conversation and hearing that tone of voice from someone and directly asking them. And that's why, you know, having conversations which aren't necessarily just work related will perhaps uncover some of the issues that people may be experiencing. Best to get in there as quickly as possible, but get the right balance. Some people will feel an overload of communication, so it's about potentially asking people, you know, what works for you. And again, it's difficult for managers because it's very subjective, and you're having to do a huge amount of flexing and adapting to what the individuals need, because they've got all these other issues going on. So there are more tips, specific examples of what you can do as a manager in communicating in the document that I mentioned, you know, how to put in meeting controls and stuff like that. So I encourage you to have a look at that. Be very transparent in your communications, and certainly, you know, everyone is adapting, so be aware of that. Just want to touch very, very briefly on this idea of weak tie communications. These are the kind of the spontaneous bumping into someone. There's a link there to an incredibly interesting YouTube video from a professor from MIT in the US. And he did this massive survey, a massive study on the impact of weak tie communications, where people are just bumping into each other. So I'd encourage you to have a quick look at that. You don't need to watch the whole thing. But it does show the impact of a lack of those spontaneous communications on productivity and actually success of certain projects within work. So I think one of the most difficult things, but one of the most important things, is going to be, how do we make sure we still get the links between people who aren't necessarily being called into Zoom meetings, Skype meetings, whatever they are. And that's where it comes down to culture. How do people talk when not in the office? Okay, so let's have a look again at the people. So we've obviously got the challenge of not just furlough, but also redundancies. It's an inevitability, and of course we're now starting to see a lot of that happening, and there could well be more than one wave of redundancies for many businesses. This creates a massive amount of uncertainty. So it's uncertainty for employees, and one of the roles of the manager is to try to create as much certainty as possible, which is difficult. But again, another survey done by Gallup said that there are 4 universal needs that followers have of leaders. Stability is number 1. Then it's hope, trust, and compassion. So that need to give clear direction, but also a sense of certainty to those who remain, is absolutely critical. But I just want to suggest that actually the managers who are having to make decisions about who is made redundant, have those conversations, and then also create certainty for those who are left is tough. So just before I go on to that. So one of the things that can really help is if managers believe and trust that the process that they have gone through to make decisions about who is redundant is absolutely fair. It takes guilt out of it. It takes absolute guilt out of the process that they may be having to go through in putting people into consultation and therefore redundancies. So we want to avoid the triggering of shame. That's really bad for our well-being. We don't want any reason for regret and remorse as a result of that. So I really encourage that. Okay, so one of the things that I would also suggest is important is measuring. And I know that certainly Amna talked about immediately doing the pulse surveys, the check-in. How are people feeling? I've got a 12-question snapshot survey that you can use on a pulse basis. If anyone wants that, just give me a shout. I can send that out to you. But that's really important on a team basis, but also on a one-to-one basis. What a 12-question survey, or 10, whatever you've got, but a short survey can do is give you averages of how people feel, but it can critically tell you where the highs and lows are. Who is the most vulnerable potentially in your team? And it's not just about the averages, it is about those who are experiencing extreme challenges as well. Of course, there are probably policies you can rest on. If there's not, go to your HR team, find out what they are, find out if they can be created. I know businesses right now, and Balfour Beatty are rewriting their flexible, or they've probably done it by now, rewriting their flexible working policy, because we're having to adjust immediately. So know what the processes are so that you can then implement those with your team. What is also important is this visibility to leadership as well. Your leadership as a manager of teams, but also the senior leadership within the organization. Very clear, transparent, regular communication from the top. Where there is a void of communication, people will fill it with negativity. It's a survival mechanism of the human species. We will predict the worst, so we're ready for it. So if the information is there, we have less to predict, and therefore we can trust and hopefully have some some trust that there is some element of stability and certainty. So I would encourage, no matter how gloomy the picture might be sometimes, there is clear transparency on the state of the business. Now, one of the things that I tend to do when I work with companies, I do tend to start with the middle manager, because they are pivotal in the well-being and the productivity of their teams. And yet they are probably the most under pressure, excessive workloads, and as a result probably need the most help with their mental health. And yet they are responsible and critical for the well-being of their team. So just a couple of graphs showing you that we have got both a dip in physical health and mental health of what is roughly that squeezed middle manager. Unfortunately, that is also echoed by the well-being across the lifespan, which is depicted here. You see this inverted bell curve. Unfortunately, when you hit working age, your well-being starts to dip, and it doesn't actually increase until you stop working. So the good news is it will pick up at retirement, but actually, really importantly, seriously, actually, those who are probably in that middle management or senior management level are at the lowest level of well-being in their life. And that's not necessarily just workloads. They have aging parents, dependents still at home, actually still at home indeed. Their own health may be being affected now, possibly in more depth than they would have expected it this year, marital breakups. But as I say, you know, slight silver lining, it will improve as you retire. But it's really important, because these managers, a lot is being expected of them. So the most common cause of long-term absence is mental ill health, followed swiftly by stress, which over a long period of time could actually lead to mental ill health. There are some stress management standards which you may well already know from HSE, and if we can manage those standards well within an organisation, then we will go some way to mitigating either the development of mental ill health or making it worse. But I would say that management is usually in normal times, and I think, as we well know, we are not in normal times, so it's a very difficult task to do. Even before lockdown, we had this rather startling picture of the cost of poor mental health to UK businesses, to employers. It's up to 45 billion. Now, this was a figure that came out in January, and it was an updated report from 2017, and we've seen an increase of 7 billion in those 3 years. I mean, a really simple question: what part of that 7 billion is actually off your bottom line as a result of poor mental health in the workplace? It's colossal, and psychotherapists are predicting that absolutely we are going to have a tsunami, I heard it called yesterday, of mental ill health. We're basically going to have a global pandemic of mental ill health, so we need to be prepared for that. So just sort of covering off finally, I want to just look at what it means therefore for managers, and what I'm about to present in a matter of a handful of slides is actually, you know, can be a whole day's course, but it just gives you a glimpse of how people can start to take responsibility for their own well-being, because at the end of the day, a manager can only go so far. So the 5 Ways to Wellbeing is a global study that was done in 2008, and there are roughly 5 areas that we can focus on in order to promote well-being for ourselves. The first of which is connection, and that has probably been the first thing that has been a personal impact for us in lockdown, the fact that we cannot connect with people, we were isolated. And startlingly, there is evidence that loneliness is as big a killer as obesity and as dangerous as heavy smoking. So it's significant. Connection is a massive issue, and is even being addressed by UK government for aging people. But actually, this has been a significant issue in lockdown as well. We are social beings. A study's been done by Harvard showed that people who have got supportive, connected relationships have a sharper memory longer into life, have a happier mood even when they're in physical pain. This has all been tested, and have improved overall health. So connection has been quite a challenge for us in lockdown. being active. So we were all given our hour a day exercise, and interestingly, exercise went up. People took what they were being given when ordinarily they wouldn't have been exercising. But actually 30 minutes of daily exercise is better for you than tablets if you're being treated for mild to moderate depression. And moderate depression, actually in most cases, it has been said that GPs will very happily give you antidepressants for mild depression, when actually what they really should be prescribing is more connection and more activity. So I encourage physical activity. Take notice. This is a very, very interesting one. It isn't necessarily about mindfulness. It's just about trying to be present. And it's tough because our attention span is dwindling. It is absolutely narrowing. So I'm going to try my last Menti, and I want you to vote what do you think is our attention span? And I'm just going to try, yeah, there we go. Defining attention span. It's when you literally focus on one task before you get distracted onto something else. So it is absolute prime attention. There's something, just while you're doing that, there's something that happened in roughly 2000 that made our attention span, well, it dropped in 2000 as a result of the introduction of something in around about 2000. Okay, that has slowed down. So most people think it's 18 seconds. It's actually 8 seconds. So in 2000, around about the time of the introduction of smartphones, our attention span dropped from 12 to 8 seconds. So a very poor comparison with a goldfish. But basically, we have got so much information that we can focus on, and yet we've got less time to do it. And that is having a massive impact on our attention span. So content is constantly increasing. This exhausts our attention, but we have an urge for newness. And the designers of our tech know this. So they are designing in the refresh, which creates a desire in us for newness and therefore more information. So it's an oversaturation because of the digital world that we're in, text, tweets, push notifications, etc. So we're craving more and more, but we're not necessarily taking stuff in. And what it's doing is stopping us from being present in the moment. So just have a look at those. So average worker is going to check their inbox 30 times every hour. They're checking their email every 1.5 minutes. And every time we start a new task, our brain has to kind of orientate itself. So basically, interruptions are just the killer of productivity. And yet social media just keeps growing and growing and growing. Smartphones, they've got this built into their design. There are 500,000 people joining Twitter every day. 12 million Twitter users follow 64 or more Twitter accounts. People spend 700 billion minutes on Facebook every minute. Sorry, every month. That would be horrendous. Every month. So I just want to say, it would be ridiculous to think that this isn't having an impact on us, an impact literally physically on us. Adrenaline is released when we see something new and a sudden change in environment. And social media is just giving us a change environment all the time. So this doesn't have to be all about meditation and mindfulness. It's just about encouraging you to think about how you might become more present. And again, you can see why there's lots more information that I don't have time to share here. So onto the next of the 5, give. Now this is a bit of a favorite of mine. So there are studies that say if you practice kindness, it has a physiological change in your brain. The chemicals, the serotonin and the dopamine, the feel-good, happy hormones, are released in your brain when you practice kindness. Conversely, negative emotions like anger or jealousy, they contribute to the production of cortisol, the stress hormone. And then the stress hormone over time does weaken the immune system. It also helps you gain weight as well. So acts of kindness can really go about promoting confidence, this sense of being in control, a sense of reward and purpose and self-worth. So I really, oh, and the other thing, when you manage to create happiness in someone else, the impact it has on you because of these happy hormones is amplified. So you make them feel better, but actually you make yourself even more better. Okay, next one, keep learning. Setting goals, particularly in adult learning, has been associated with higher levels of well-being. So this is about boosting your confidence, achievement. Remember what it was like when you learned to ride a bike without stabilizers, that huge sense of achievement. Now, that's the 5, but I just want to touch on sleep super quickly before we finish. It's one of the most important factors in our well-being. It's the cornerstone of well-being, but we can't control it. We can change the factors around it, but actually it's the one that we probably have the least control over and possibly we worry about as well. So falling asleep can be hard. You know, you can't make yourself digest food any faster. You can't make yourself fall asleep any faster, but you can control the conditions of sleep. So this is about how our mind is and what our physical environment is. And I could spend a whole day talking about sleep. And there are so many studies that we can draw on about what will help you get better sleep. And sleep is a very active state. We used to think it was inactive, as you would expect. But for the last 60 years, scientists have been discovering just how active our brain is when we're asleep. So if you're not getting the right sleep and you're not getting the right length of sleep, you're impacting your capability the next day. It immediately impacts your capability. The average is about 8.25 hours. Probably seems like quite a lot, but the evidence is for that. Just 1 hour less sleep each night over a long period of time can significantly impact your health, your long-term health. We need different levels of sleep. I'm going to go quickly over this because of time, but this gives you an indication of how very much our sleep patterns will change and our need for sleep varies over time. And then just finally, lots and lots of ways in which you can promote your well-being, and nowhere near enough detail for you there, but hopefully that's just giving you a bit of a picture of how managers in particular need to look after their well-being. But I really advocate that you make this as much of a routine as possible. 40% of our day is habit and routine. You know, we don't have a big negotiation with ourselves about, are we going to clean our teeth in the morning? We just do it. And it's good for us, of course. So it's about trying to build up a pattern of habits that just naturally impact and promote well-being for us. So there are 2 core elements to creating a new habit: the value that it gives you and your desire to achieve it. So it's not about, I must do this. It's kind of, I want to do this and I will do this. It takes about 2 months to be precise. It takes about 66 days to create a new habit. You've always got to start at day 1. So maybe that's today. So I hope that's been useful. My contact details are there. If there is anything you want to ask me, if you want that 12-question survey, I've got benchmarks for that survey as well, so you could see how you stack up to national averages pre-COVID, and the wellbeing guide there for managing remotely. So I hope that has been useful, and I'm going to hand back to Ian. Ian, no idea if we've got time for questions, but I'm more than happy to answer questions if there are some.
Eileen, that's really great. Thank you very much. I think we've got probably about 5 minutes just for some quick questions. So folks, if you want to use questions, please use the chat function or for the best way to do it. So many people on the call, raising your hands might be difficult for us to see. A couple of questions we have had through your presentation, Eileen. First one was it's a question that I noted down regarding the different management styles. Somebody was asking whether you could have more than one management style, or you could have all the management styles.
Absolutely, you can have more than one. The reason you may have more than one is that if you, when you change your behaviors because of the situation you find yourself in, your management style will change. So you could be a very gentle, calm mentor, and then when you're under pressure, you turn into a hero, or an analyst. Some people tend to go down into detail. So yes, you can change. But I think what you're really asking is, can you actually have a blend? And I think the answer is absolutely you can. I use a profiling tool called See Me when I work with leadership teams, and it looks at behavior. It doesn't look at personalities, because that's a little bit too personal. It looks at the behaviors of a leadership team, and those behaviors will absolutely fit into different styles. But awareness of those behaviors and the impact they have on people goes so far in being able to then maybe adapt some of those behaviors to get the best out of your people. So I hope that helps. The See Me is a great tool. If you want any more information about that, I can certainly do that for you as well.
Excellent. Another question which came in as well, a question or a comment. Somebody was making the point about the number of video calls that I think we all have these days, and someone made the point that actually more than 5 hours a day of video calls, we should put a limit on it. I just wondered if you had a recommendation regarding that.
It's highly subjective, and I think this is where I would encourage managers to really look at the different ways in which they're communicating. I talk about this in the guide that I mentioned. It's a teeny little tip. When you're organising an hour's meeting, make it 50 minutes. If you have had 5 hours of Zoom calls, but they've been 50 minutes rather than an hour, you've just reclaimed a decent amount of time where you can maybe just go out and have a walk around the block and call it your commute back to home. There isn't an optimum. I think what doesn't work is 8 hours of it. I think it's more important that you have breaks in between them, and that you're on the right calls and you're not being called into ones you don't need to be in. And I think it's about either communicating to your leader or you as a manager asking, what have you got on today? Where are your thoughts? Where's your energy? Where's your attention? Or for the week? And what is your capacity for those Zoom calls? And I would absolutely encourage, I'm seeing more and more people are moving half of their meetings to a telephone so they can walk and talk at the same time.
That's a really good tip. I've also found that in Outlook there's something called focus time, where it will actually set you some automatically look at your calendar and set you a number of hours a day just to focus on doing all the things you're not doing when you're on a Zoom call. I think it's a really nice tip.
Nice.
The question coming in about a comment, amazing presentation, Eileen, really informative. Can we have a copy of your slides? Absolutely, Brian will be sorting out the slides that are made available and what have you. So. Folks, let's do a virtual round of applause for Eileen. Fabulous presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's superb. Yeah. Okay then, folks. We're just conscious of your time and the fact that we've got 50 minutes left now. But we do have 3 more great speakers in our second panel. And our second panel, we're going to be looking at some of the practicalities of working from home. And to help us with that, we've got Eric Evans, who's the founder of DuoMe, who's got some online tools to help us do that. We've got Martin Pratt, who's a partner at Ince Gordon & Dad's, who's a lawyer who can help us look at some of those issues we've got around contracts and responsibilities that we have as employees. But to start off with, we've got Shirley Hazlitt, who's a scientific support at the Health and Safety Executive. And Shirley's been working in the area of musculoskeletal well-being for some time now, and I'm really pleased to invite her to say a few words about how that can impact on well-being of the teams who work with. So Shirley, over to yourself.
Hello, can you see and hear me?
I can definitely see and hear you, yes. Hopefully everybody else can.
I'd like to first of all say that the presentations this morning have been amazing, and I think there's a massive overlap in a lot of the things that are being said, so well done everybody. In terms of myself, it says on the leaflet that I'll be talking about the legal and safety aspects of the new way of working. I can't speak on legal matters, but I'm very happy to share my experiences with you. I have been working for the Health and Safety Executive for the last 16 years, and I've been responsible for DSC all of that time. I have I represent HSE on the cross-government forums, which shape the future of the DSE recommendations, guidance, regulations, policy. So I'm very involved on the bottom line of input to what everybody needs to do to work as safely as they can. I'm also involved in the creation and beta testing of some online DSE software for various different companies. So yeah, quite a lot of DSE experience. As regards flexible working, HSE, we went into lockdown, but I had a flexible working arrangement with them. I actually work my full-time hours, but I work them over 4 days. I start at 7 and I finish at 6 from Monday to Thursday. That worked really well for me because it gave me a better work-life balance. With sort of a longer weekend, I have parental responsibilities and need to travel down the country for elder care, and that made my life a lot more balanced. I think we've touched on some of this morning. During lockdown, HC actually, we have core hours. It's not the 10 to 3, it's got a split in the middle for lunchtime. But basically, we didn't need to work the core hours anymore. We could work our hours as we wished, but that is resuming itself back in September. So we are going back to the core hours and to some normality. A lot of people have adjusted well to working at home. I've seen such a massive change. We went through a phase, and I'm sure that your organisations have had to do the same, of needing to look at individuals or talk to individuals to find out what their home DSE work setup is, to look at their musculoskeletal situation. And the outcome of that has been the ordering of new equipment provision. But it's very well to order and provide new equipment, but it's equally important to follow up to make sure that individuals know how to set it up and how to sit and work as safely as they can. We embrace it stand working as well as sitting, and one of the things that I do as an individual is I deliver one of the commercial DSE assessor training courses for HSE. So I get to talk to lots of different organisations, and they all have different issues to address. Some have standard equipment, but there's been a need for adaptation. So this year we've seen the landscape of office working really encompass home working, and more recently the introduction of agile working. On the home working situation, the things an employer should consider, fully appreciate that there's going to be constraints, budget constraints, which come into this, but we do need to give it attention. Many individuals, myself included, were suddenly put into lockdown with a need to work from home, and I rang round various different teams in HSE to find out what their situations were and what considerations needed to be taken to place. What problems were they facing? It was interesting because there was first of all the physical situation. Some families had actually got an office, a desk set up, and things were well, but equally some of those families had youngsters that needed to use computer for schoolwork, or partners that also needed to work at the same desk, and then there was a lot of desk sharing and shuffling going on. Some companies were providing desks and things, but there's a need, if you're going to be in that situation, to look at the home situation to find out where it's going to fit and what's actually going to work for that family. Some people have an office, as I said, others are working from the kitchen table. I spoke to an individual who was needing to work till 12, clear the table when it rained so that the family could sit down for lunch, and was over the moon when the sun was shining because the family could sit in the garden and have a picnic, and he could carry on working with less interruption. And I think it's a good example of how people have had to adapt to working and doing the best that they can. I also spoke to an individual who had a back issue, and while we were waiting to sort out OH referred equipment, he was actually taking his laptop every so often and putting up the ironing board and putting it on there, because that meant he could vary his position and he could stand for a while. And what I want to say is it's not about, there's a need to be adaptive in these sorts of situations on a temporary basis. I know that we all need to find proper solutions longer term, but there's a need for people to be able to do the best that they can. I also found people with IT constraints. They were having to use the personal equipment because maybe work equipment couldn't, maybe for security reasons, contact Zoom. People were paying extra money out on their phone contracts because they didn't have work phones, but they needed to be more available, and there was a cost to that. Desks, chairs, broadband, they're all different things that needed to be considered. And we also need to look at the general DSE regs and look at things like lighting, heating, space, etc. So there's a lot to think about. I think it's also important to say that DSE, generally, when we look at the regulations, is the responsibility of the duty holder as well as the employee. And then it's got to be a bit of give and take on both sides. And it's about getting the risk to being hurt as low as possible, but taking everyone's individual situations into account. Yeah, we've covered some, this earlier speakers have covered some of this, but there's the budget to think about. There's a need to consider that there's appropriate space for people to work. We've got mental well-being considerations to take into place. We've got different people. We've got introverts, we've got extroverts, and they cope differently with working at home and under pressure. And the managers are under pressure to understand those individual situations. Some of those managers might lack training in that sort of area because it's all suddenly come about and they've not necessarily been prepared. I echo, I think it was Rick earlier said about doing training courses at home. If you can do that, that's really, really helpful. If you've got an OH facility available to you, can get wellbeing counselling from there, but tends to only be available in larger businesses. And we also need to think about furloughed staff. There's a need for them to be kept up to date and in contact with what's going on with the business when they're not coming to work, so that they don't become out of touch and detached. Providing equipment is not enough. Staff need to know how to set it up, how to use it. There's been a rise in musculoskeletal instances from using the kitchen table and a chair because the heights are all wrong. People are establishing back issues and back pain from using a kitchen chair. But one of the phrases we tend to use in the training course, and I think it stands good for everybody, is that the best posture for any individual is the next posture. And I'd encourage everybody to get up and move, even if it's stand up and have a stretch every 20 minutes or so, but go to the next posture. Even if it means going and using an ironing board for 10 minutes or a different surface so you can stand a bit, vary it around. You can pretty much do anything as long as it's for a short period of time, and you're not in a bad posture all of the time. I hope that makes sense. Recognition that families all have different setups, more than one person working at home. So they're all competing for the computer, and there are interruptions to the working day. I've had meetings and then the doorbell rings, or during lockdown, the food order arrived if you were lucky enough to get one. And all of that needs to be sort of taken into account and factored in because we're all working differently. There's been a partial return to some offices, which is taking place now. but many people will remain working at home during this winter, and we may or may not have a second wave hit, and there is a need for companies to gear up for that, as it may well happen. Obviously, I don't know, but I think there's a need to give it some thought. So I've heard speakers cover productivity this morning, and mental and physical well-being, and of course flexible working. Zoom, Skype meetings are really good for keeping in touch with colleagues, and it's good to notice if someone seems a bit out of sorts, somebody that you maybe worked in the office and you get to know them, and then it's a case of gently raising concerns with the management if you need to, or maybe giving them a ring and just saying, hey, are you okay? But there's a need to communicate and support your colleagues and keep in touch, but obviously without overstepping a line. If you're working at home and you've got your setup, you've got to consider your desk height, your chair height and adjustability, lighting, your monitor height. And if you're on a laptop, we would recommend a separate keyboard and a laptop riser to bring your screen up to eye height. But the most important thing really is to take breaks and remember that the best posture is the next posture. We're spending more time with our families, which has given us a better work-life balance, and we're saving money by not travelling. But we need to have a little bit of give and take, as our employees are not necessarily finding this that easy either. And it's a case of looking at it through two pairs of eyes and working as best that we possibly can and supporting each other through these difficult times. We're working at home. We're not official home workers. And I've put some links. You should have a slide coming out in the slide pack with some links to the HSE guidance on regulations that's available on the HSE website. I think that's me. If you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Shirley, that's excellent. Thank you very much. We'll take questions all at the end of this session, if that's possible. We'll do a panel with the three speakers together. So thank you again to hands together. Thank you. I think we should all stand up though now, and I'll just stand up because Shirley said the next best posture is the next posture. So stand up, give it a little wiggle, and sit back down again. Before we get our next speaker, who I'd like to introduce is our next speaker is Eric Evans, and Eric Evans is the founder of DuoMe. Now they get some practical tools of how to enable working flexibly. So, Eric, over to you.
Hi there. Thanks a lot, Ian. Okay, so if you can go on to the first slide. So DuoMe is effectively it's a flexible working solution that we provide to companies, and so our initial focus is around supporting job shares in the workforce. So there's challenges around people finding partners and being able to split roles effectively. And so, what we do is we support companies to be able to offer, kind of flexible solutions to their staff. Now, obviously with COVID, it's been a huge change in expectations to do with flexible working. And so, we've been doing quite a lot of work to do with remote since sort of March this year. But a lot of what we're doing is kind of like future looking in terms of where this is going to lead to. So a lot of what I'm about to talk to is kind of like sort of directionally, where do we think this is going to head? And then sort of, what things do we think will change as we go forward? So one of the things that we did, so in June, we basically did a poll around sort of what expectations are from people to do with how they'd like to see the next phase. So obviously mass remote. So Office for National Statistics in March said effectively half of the working population was remote, and 80% of that was effectively there because of COVID. And so, as we move forward though, like longer term, what's the expectations of people? And in general, people want to continue to have that flexibility of working from home, but also this kind of mixed expectation around sort of 2 to 3 days in the office and then a set of days remote. Because a lot of the conversations at the moment and to date have been, it's either, people are in the office or it's remote, but the mixed work style starts to introduce a lot of things that have got to be planned for. And through this poll, right, you see it was quite a varied set of roles across all industries. And so one of the things that we're talking to companies about is, what does that mean for your work style to have this mixed setup? So when are the right people, when are the right days for people to be in the office? How do you start to plan the way that people should, schedule when they want to work in the office? The office becomes a bit of a constrained resource. So if we go on to the next slide. And companies are going to continue to want remote, right? So already we've heard, Schroders actually just this week have announced that they're going to let all of their staff potentially work remotely. We know large companies are looking at reducing the size of the office space that they have. So a lot of companies are looking at their cost base as they try to recover. And so the reduction of office space and being able to more better utilize their occupancy is an obvious way for them to save costs. So I think this is probably one of the first times where, when you think about flexible working, and remote working is one of the kind of 3 pillars of flexibility, which are, where you work, the hours that you work, and how much that you work. This is probably one of the first times that there's been a mass alignment of the incentive from organizations to get behind it, because of the reductions that they're going to be able to make on office space. And previously, what had happened was companies, when you had, lots of companies had people would work remotely sometimes, and it was generally, it might be ad hoc or it might be formalized in an arrangement, but it tended to be all clustered at the same time. Like, there'd be a lot of people that would work remotely on a Friday. It probably wasn't balanced during the week. But when you think about this next phase, actually the optimal allocation of people across the week is going to be critical. And also making sure that as we look forward, people have all continued to work because of the networks that they've built whilst they were, probably in and around a lot of people in the office. And in this next phase, as you get new people joining companies, actually thinking about when people are in the office and making sure that, if Eric and Ian always never work on a Friday in the office, how do Eric and Ian ever meet? You've got to start to think about those topics, right? Additionally, companies are really thinking about global remote competencies, and we've got a case study on the next slide. But for companies, being able to widen the talent pool and think about where they can place their workforce, for some global companies, being able to place their workforce very close to the customer has a lot of localization benefit. And now, as they get better and better at remote, being able to do that without the kind of expense of a regional office is going to be a big draw. And what you're going to start to see is, and there's a lot of talk about kind of competition for talent, right? But the companies that are really excellent at remote, they're going to deliberately design their work style for their employees around how having good practices around remote work. And it won't be that remote working will be something else that we do. It will be front and center about how the company is effective and productive. Okay, if we go to the next slide. So Stripe, this is all things that they did pre-COVID, but it's an example of this mixed work style. So again, the notion that there's this sort of everybody's in the office, or people are remote, companies are remote. There's a lot of companies which are doing this mixed work style, and actually a lot of the innovation that's happening around kind of flexible working is in and around that collaboration across those. And so for Stripe, what they did was they had engineering competency centers that were in physical locations. So they had San Francisco, they had one in Ireland, but they opened their 5th one, and it was a remote competency center, but they opened it as if they opened a physical location. So it had a lead that was the head of remote. It had a set of processes and practices which were tailored around, how they sort of operated. And, they learned a lot of things as they went through the way. And these slides can be distributed. There's quite a lot of stuff in their case study, but they found real key things. Like, for instance, on a project, if you only have a single remote person on a project, so you've got a team of 5 and you put one fully remote person on it, they found that led to issues to do with everybody else kind of having proximity to each other. So what they found was that they always staffed projects where they added remote resource with more than one remote resource, because it adjusted the kind of balance of the team, right? And then, other things were, I talked a little bit about the kind of recognition of being close to the customer. But there's a lot of focus on that with companies, right? Being able to deploy resources very close to the customer and sort of align their product regionally is super important. They also found around kind of sentiment and adjusting based upon how they learned. And we've seen a lot of that anyway, right? So there's been a lot of, push down guidance and of around how to engage your workforce while they're remote. But that's one of the areas where I think there's quite a lot of the sort of movement in terms of tools and technologies to kind of gauge the sentiment of teams. Okay, if we go to the next slide. Okay, and I think it's fairly obvious, right? But, over the long term, it's very likely that people will continue to want to have remote. So we saw earlier this kind of difference between the mixed work style and all remote. But if you look at the the kind of rationale, and this was a survey done in April, but there's a lot of benefits, right? Particularly, we just saw with Eileen earlier to do with kind of well-being, and I think actually some of the points to do with interruptions and productivity are, they constantly come up, right? The ability of people to have real core focus time, and I think one of the things that is an emerging area when you think about how to be productive whilst remote is this notion of flexible hours and not being tied to the fixed hours pattern of working in the office. So one of the things that we hear is, early stage sort of like mass turn on of remote, there was a lot of sort of remote working was effectively office plus Zoom. So you're just basically on the Zoom call and you're doing the exact same hours. But people are recognizing that one of the benefits of being able to promote the sort of well-being and people fit more life around their work, you've got to let people be able to kind of schedule their time and when they work more effectively. If we go to the next slide. So, it's not been without issues though. This was touched on earlier, but the exhaustion of video calls, so like the Zoom fatigue is a definite thing. Almost any conversation that we go into, that's one that's always raised. I think if you're in a situation where you're effectively on 8 hours of back-to-back video calls, it's really, really difficult to be productive towards the end of that. I think the notion of splitting time so that you have a bit of time between the meetings. Additionally, I mean, if you're leading a team, there are tools out there. For instance, there's a tool called Loom, which is it's sort of asynchronous video. So you record a short snippet and you can record your desktop and then it's available for people to play back. Inside of DoMe, we use that for our feedback for anything that gets passed around. So rather than having a live call, what we do is we'll capture that feedback and send it. And then other people have got a record of what's in there as well. So things like that are pretty important. Like the blurring of the lines of home and work are significant. So there was a survey, again, part of the workforce survey in April from Office of National Statistics. They saw that, about a third of people were working longer hours when home. So the notion of being able to kind of create that separation of, home and work life, being able to turn off, that is a real challenge. And there's lots of, good suggestions out there. People to integrating exercise in their routine, going out for a walk before they start work, going out for a walk as they choose to finish work, having a kind of set time that they begin their other kind of habits and disciplines makes a lot of sense. Social isolation, it's a big thing, right? People dropping off the radar, and because they're remote, not necessarily people being aware of that, whereas you can just kind of get the sense of the room when you're in the office is a big thing. And then obviously balancing sort of the homeschooling in the current cycle has been substantial. And so this notion of remote and flexible hours, it's going to be a big topic, as we start to think about this next work style. So the manager, there's a whole piece to do with how does the manager sort of evolve. It's going to require the manager to start to do new things, right? So where is everybody today? How do I allocate them in the best way? How do I think about how I make sure that they're, not dropping off the radar? How do I check in? But without it being overburdensome, because some of the things that we've heard is, people having 2-3 different sets of check-in calls with the same people. So you're spending a lot more time, kind of doing stand-up around what people are doing. So how do you move more of those processes to being things which are kind of written or, you know, asynchronous, so they can be, you know, sort of caught up at different times of the day. All right, next slide. And then, you know, so I would say it's sort of a lot of the kind of best practice is starting to percolate out there. So, you know, probably the number one thing is to try and move to more written, deliberate communication. So if you're going to be able to support people to sort of get up to speed with what's going on in the team, expecting everybody to attend all meetings live, you know, it's very difficult to be able to fit that around. So one of the things, you know, GitLabs do, who are an all remote company, is if you suggest that there should be a meeting, you are responsible for capturing all of the output and documenting the output of that meeting and sharing it on their internal wiki. So there's effectively like an extra step you have to do for calling a meeting. And what it does is it gets everybody to be able to share the info. So the info of that meeting lets people then be able to go and catch up if they want to do it offline. But it's also a kind of checkpoint around, you know, how do I actually need this meeting? Is it something that we can do in a fashion that doesn't require us to get everybody on a call? I think a lot more of this sort of expensive calls of having the whole team together multiple times across all different time zones, you know, I think there's going to be much more pushback and resistance to that, and sort of seeing new and innovative solutions around how do you kind of support that kind of asynchronous communication. Yeah, so that's kind of it. I guess I'm at time.
Thank you very much, Eric. Really interesting to see how we can be using technology and platforms such as Eric's to just make it easier as managers and businesses to move to more remote working. So just remind you all, if you're wanting to ask any questions, or Shirley or Eric, or indeed our next speaker, Martin, use the chat, put them in the chat, and we'll pick up on those. Shirley mentioned that she wasn't an expert on legal, which is good news, because we've got Martin Pratt, who partner at Gordon & Dad's, who is an expert on legal. So over to Martin, who's going to give us an insight into the types of things, that responsibilities that employers need to be thinking about, and how contracts should be changed when we're looking at remote working. So Martin, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. When I'm talking to law students and trainees about what sort of work employment law involves, I describe it as being a cross between a commercial lawyer and a family lawyer. You're a family lawyer insofar as that employees spend as much, perhaps more of their time with their colleagues, or did, as they did their own family or their own significant other. And also, you know, being separated from your job, being dismissed, being made redundant is often as stressful, or nearly as stressful, as a divorce. But it's also a commercial role, because the law starts from the point that you have a bargain with your employees that is written into a contract. They provide their work and you provide them with money. It's what we call the wage work bargain. And you can't just change that when you want to, any more than you can any other contract. You can't put a 5th floor on a 4-story building just because you think it works better. Similarly, technically and in reality, employees see their contract of employment, and the law sees contract of employment, as part of the bargain and the binding terms between an employee and an employer. And that causes a problem, because if you're talking about being flexible and being agile, contracts are not flexible and agile. And many of you, in fact, I would imagine most of you, have contracts which are compliant. For those of you in HR will know this, what's called Section 1 of the Employment Rights Act, where certain terms are written down and presented to employees. That includes the pay and how often people are paid. And most importantly, for the current discussion, the place of work. Where do people work? You will have given a piece of paper to an employee that says their place of work is somewhere. Their principal place of work is a location in London or somewhere else. What we're seeing now is that with agile and flexible working is becoming less and less important. But the law is still stuck in a position whereby a location is somewhere where you're given, and it's not in the home. It's not, You know, we're still thinking the old normal. In fact, we're not just thinking the old normal, we're still thinking the 20th century. This law was last codified in 1996. So immediately you have an issue. You are going to be, with your current employees and the people you're taking on, you're going to have to be looking at where the place of work is going to be in the future. And flexibility can be written into a contract, and it will be written into a contract going forward for new joiners. But for people who've worked for you for some time, it's going to be different. And when that different comes in, the law which governs your workplace relationships in the workplace suddenly expands into people's homes. I'm going to start with, for example, confidentiality and data protection. If someone at home is working from home with a personal computer that they're sharing with the whole family, that could be, in fact probably is, a breach of both the Data Protection Act 2018 and more broadly the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. If your spouse is looking at your computer that you do work on, you're going to have items of personal data relating to other people and confidential information relating to your employer potentially on the hard drive of that computer, and that could be a breach. We've already heard from a couple of excellent speakers regarding health and safety. Now, health and safety is now in the home, is now your legal responsibility. The Health and Safety at Work Act extends to the home because the home is now at work. How do you get permission to go into somebody's house to do VDU assessments, audiovisual assessments? Is someone's desk set up correctly? It is going to be a heck of a change for employers to insist, as I think that they may have to do unless there's some form of change, to be able to access people's homes to make sure that these very important aspects of workplace security, both in a health and safety aspect and also in a data protection confidentiality aspects, are being quite properly dealt with. Now, there are, on top of the contract of employment, the law has recognized for a couple of centuries now that the employer has more bargaining power than the employee. So on top of that have been built the various statutory protections, from unfair dismissal through discrimination, through health and safety at work, which protect the employee from misuse of the employment contract by the employer. That means that whole new aspects of workplace law are coming into place going forward. And I don't think that the new normal will be different, but it won't be that much different for the simple reason is some people cannot work from home and will not be able to work from home, and in some cases do not want to be able to work from home. So as much as we are concentrating in this session quite rightly about the new challenges of working from home, one mustn't forget that working from home is not a luxury that everybody has. We've already heard some people talk about the problems of work-life balance in the house, children taking up time. That's very important, and it's also something that could creep into discrimination claims against your firm. Sadly, we know that ethnic minorities tend to be more socio-economically disadvantaged. That simply means that many of them have smaller houses, and so do young people, especially since the 2008 financial crash that we still haven't fully recovered from. We're going to have young people who often flat share, live with their parents, don't have the luxury of a separate workspace that us older folks have. So if you can't justify why somebody should work from home, you're going to have to provide them, with an office space. And what concerns me is that we're going to end up with a form of home working apartheid, insofar as some people can work from home and will, and other people still have to go to the office or the workplace, even though their colleagues can work elsewhere. That's something that employers are going to have to be very, very careful of. Don't assume that somebody who comes in is going to be delighted with the idea that you encourage home working. you're still going to have people who are going to necessarily have to work within a more traditional office environment. This is why I think that the new normal is coming so quickly that the law is not catching up, it's not following up, and as a result, I think that employers will have legal difficulties in coping. And going back to what I said, contracts are not agile, they're not flexible. Policies can be changed, they're simply standing instructions, but contracts are a bargain. They're something you've agreed with your employee. Even if it's a standard form contract, it's still something that they have read and agreed to and given their given their consent to. You can't just simply go and change that. So there are whole new legal aspects of employment law that the old normal is running in collision with the law and the new normal. We don't know what the new normal is going to be yet, and the law catches up at a glacial pace, and it's not going to catch up until well after that becomes clear. Data protection law has not caught up even today really with the massive invasions of privacy and home and that social media has produced. And even 30 years after it was invented, some would say that it hasn't really caught up even with the internet. The same will be true of employment law. You're going to have to start looking at ways of applying the old law to the new environment for some considerable time, because it takes a very long time for these things to catch up. So always be mindful of that. And again, I think I'm coming up to my 10 minutes. So if anybody has any questions, then do drop me a line, or I think we've got a bit of time at the end, and I'm keen to get the questions in before we run out of time at 1 o'clock.
Thanks, Martin. That's been really thought-provoking. Really thought-provoking, particularly the inclusion piece. I think that inclusion piece about different ethnic groups and social economic groups and young people are really important pieces. I've had a couple of questions sent to me in the private chat as chair, which is interesting. I'm pretty for this question out to yourself, Martin, also to Shirley. She's still on the panel. Shirley talked about having a process in place to provide guidance on what is good practice for home working in terms of well-being and how you sit and what have you. That might mean that the company then purchases equipment. Might then mean that the company also does a workstation assessment, a workplace assessment as well, which might be done remotely. What happens though if your employees refuse to follow that support that you've provided, and they still work on the sofa, and they still end up getting well-being issues because they're not following the advice and guidance that you're giving out as employees? How far does an employer's responsibilities go?
Well, I think an employer's responsibility, this is precisely the problem that I think we're identifying, is the practical problem is monitoring it.
Yeah.
If you, in a workplace, it's easy. If somebody's not following procedure and they don't, the policies and procedures, ultimately, nobody wants to go down this route, but ultimately a disciplinary route could be taken. If somebody is not complying with health and safety procedures, even that relate to their own safety or the safety of other people. The difficulty I have as a lawyer is how you can monitor and enforce health and safety at work through home working without the employee giving permission to the employer to actually physically come around and check. And that causes massive implications for privacy. And there are going to be a lot of employees, quite rightly, they're going to be very unhappy to give their employer nearly unrestricted access to their home. So yeah, it's a very good question, and the point that I made from a legal perspective, the law is still catching up. But I think that if you have evidence of it, you would probably have to say that we can't permit you to keep working like this, and the ultimate sanction, sadly, would have to be a disciplinary one.
Also, could you insist on people working in the office if they haven't got the right facilities at home?
Yeah, ultimately, that as the pandemic starts to recede, there's questions of a second wave, obviously. The easier it is going to be for an employer to say that there's no valid health and safety reason for somebody to object to working from home. At the moment, I think there is. I think it would be a brave employer to insist that somebody comes in, but that is going to become less and less. Well, hopefully, it's 6 to 1, half dozen the other end. We all want the pandemic to recede, and some people might have different rates of comfort, which we're seeing already. But ultimately, if an employer has the recommended health and safety measures in place, there's going to become a point where, yes, they can insist on somebody coming back into the office.
Thanks, Martin. Surely, from the HSE's point of view, and just picking up on this issue, would you have a point of view, advice and guidance for us?
I think that what Ian said is right. We're kind of in transition. What I was thinking as he was speaking was that I mentioned that I've been involved with creation of various online DSE packages, and that companies might wish to consider looking at ones which have a home working module in them. And if an employee has completed their DSE assessment online, and they've answered the questions and said that everything is all right, the company is demonstrating that it's provided compliance. This was the two-way street that I was mentioning. And they've also got a record of that, of the individual saying, yes, my desk is set up right, my monitor's right, my chair's right, or no, it's not, I need such and such. And then there will be a record going on onto that person's assessment saying, now we've provided this, and at least give some kind of something concrete that can be looked at. Whereas if you've not got anything, you've got a verbal assessment. I've done a lot of telephonic DSE assessments, and it's very difficult because then you've got to record it, and then you've got to think about confidentiality. So
thanks, Shirley. Yeah. To me, it seems like compliance is one thing, but as good employers, we want to go way beyond compliance, don't we? We actually care about the well-being of our teams, and we want to make sure that they, if they're happy employees, a productive employer. So there's something about leaders and managers picking up on some of the things that Eileen was saying earlier about how we create the right culture for home working, and people realising, what that right culture is and how it's good for their own well-being.
Sorry.
Yeah, Martin, go ahead. Yeah.
You just want to talk about, Shirley's quite right. A workplace self-assessment is a very useful. I mean, to be a lawyer, well, I am a lawyer, lawyer about this, it does provide a defense in any, a prosecution brought by the health and safety executive or any complaint made in a civil court by an employee. But I'm dubious. I'm just concerned about how determinative it would be, because it's incumbent upon the employer to ensure compliance. And it's a whole new world here. And I had these problems with employees even before COVID, and I just think there's but there wasn't the pressure for legislative change. But I think that's going to start to be overwhelming if this carries on.
Very quickly, the last question which has come through to me before we hand back to Bryony, 2-minute summary. You talked about rewriting contracts for people who are now working partly home, partly in the office, or fully home, but their contracts would say home working. Obviously, we go through a consultation process with your teams. But how quickly do you think those contracts should be rewritten through a consultation process? Bearing in mind that the law, it's going to take years to catch up.
Well, a contract can be changed as soon as the two parties agree to it. So a consultation can be informal. If somebody comes to you and says, I want to, as it was previously, I want this flexible working arrangement, can we put it into place? And it's just a simple question of saying yes and writing it down somewhere. Right. The difficulty arises in bulk changes that you want to impose unilaterally. And that's a very, very, if you want to do that for more than 20 or more people, the collective consultation regime, the collective redundancy consultation regime comes in, because the ultimate sanction the ultimate way of changing someone's employment contract who doesn't want to is to say, right, we're bringing the old contract to the end, to an end. Here's the new contract. You can go straight onto that, or you can leave. It very rarely happens, but that's the ultimate thing that does happen. And that it comes within the European definition of a redundancy. So you would have to actually collectively consult with people for at least 30 days, and for them to elect employee representatives. So, bulk changes to these contracts have to be done very carefully and over at least a month.
Thanks, Martin. Right, we're right up against the time stoppers now, so I'll just be handing back to Bryony in one moment time. Big thank you to all of our panel again, really giving some very useful insight there. Somebody made a comment before about the ability to do more training whilst at home. I chair the Fairness, Inclusion, Respect steering group for the construction sector. We've got a whole range of virtual workshops and lunch and learn sessions coming up. Please do go to the to our website to find out more, or just put Fairness, Inclusion, Respect into your web browser and you'll be taken to these. Lots of things coming up, lots of things hopefully will be helping you around well-being, speaking out, cultural diversity, managing challenging conversations, etc. So lots in there and lots of practical help available, and tools and techniques available in the first session as well. Okay, Bryony, I think it's now a case of handing back to yourself for a few words of wisdom and summing up. Bryony, over to yourself. Bryony is just saying as well that we've just shared the feedback. We'd like you, before you leave the session, if you'd like to go into chat and just see the surveymonkey.co.uk just to get to give your feedback on today. But Bryony, I think you want to make a few closing remarks.
I do want to make a few closing remarks, and thank you very much, Ian, and everybody else who has spoken today. That, of course, is my first job. Today has exposed two of my pet hates and two of my great faults. So you've seen the real me. Some of you will have known the real me for a long time. One thing I hate is talking to a camera. Another thing I hate is talking to a script, as you will have gathered first thing this morning. I'm useless at it. I don't enjoy it. I always go off message. And I forgot to print one of the pages that I was supposed to give you. So apologies, you didn't get the full story at the beginning. But we've had a fascinating day, and I hope you have been inspired. That's the whole point of inspiring change. It is to inspire some change in this great industry of ours. We've held this conference now for 2 years. We should have had the third one in May this year. We're hoping that it will be, I don't know whether I've got my screen shared again. I'm hoping, yes, I do want to stop Ian from sharing it. I'm hoping that, but I can't do it. Yes, Ian hasn't switched off, I don't think. I'll carry on. The Inspiring Change is supposed to be now on the 10th of December. As usual, we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers, including Nadeem Zahawi, who is the construction minister. He has said that he will speak. We have checked with everybody. No, it's not working. We have checked with everyone. They are still planning on speaking, but of course we don't know what's going to happen. So whatever happens, we will have an event. It might be virtual, but it might not be. It might be half and half. So in the true spirit of what we've been talking about today, there may be a blended mix. We certainly will be live streaming it, whatever happens. Just a couple of things that have really come out to me clearly, loudly and clearly, if we didn't know them already. One is that we need to consult. We need to ask people, one, how they feel, two, how they're working, how they want to work, how they can, how we as employers can best meet their needs, but at the same time meet the needs of the business. It's so important that we do consult and we do listen to people, particularly in this time of stress, as Eileen so brilliantly demonstrated to us all. We've all felt it. We've all felt a little stressed. We've all felt pressure. I used to hate going into London for meetings and sitting on the train for an hour, to go for a meeting for an hour and then sit on the train coming back for an hour. Now I love it, quite frankly. And I'm used to working from home, and I'm used to working remotely, and I'm used to having loads of telephone calls and all the rest of it. But it has got now to the stage where I would like to see some people and talk to them face to face rather than over a telephone or via video call. But another thing that is absolutely clear, and I had hoped that Steve Fox was still going to be on the line, is that flexible working does not mean reduced working necessarily. Last year at Inspiring Change, we had a wonderful young woman who was a single mother and who'd become a roofer. She couldn't work the hours that the site had dictated, so she had a chat and she changed her hours. She still worked the same amount of hours, she just did them that fit in a way that they fit in with her life. So please, please don't go away thinking flexible working always means reduced hours. It doesn't. It means fitting it in around the things that need to be done, and that will be different for everybody. So my message to you all is carry on talking and make sure that what you're talking about works for everybody. Now, back to my thanks. We have heard some great stories and we've received some excellent advice from all of the speakers. I do love these events. They are wonderful. They're a wonderful way to learn, in my opinion. I'd like to thank the speakers and the chairs, all of whom gave up their time to join us today, but also those behind the scenes who've supported me, in particular, Sarah, Mia and Antoinette from Action Sustainability. Action Sustainability are our delivery partner as far as the FIR programme is concerned. But I'd also like to pay special thanks to my colleague Houston, who bailed me out last night and again first thing this morning when my slides were playing up. But I'd also like to thank my colleagues within the other trade federations and Jenny Herdman from HBF in particular. Also the CITB, also anybody else in the old saying, anybody else who knows me. So thank you for listening. I will be sending out links to all sorts of things. If you want to hear more, please email me. You should all have my email address. And I look forward to seeing you again in the not too distant future. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.